Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're travelling back in time, not to witness a battle or meet a famous king, but to pull up a wooden bench at a smoky medieval table and eat. That's right, tonight is about food. Not just any food though, medieval food, the kind of stuff that's been unfairly labelled as bland or weird or frankly gross. But here's the twist, it's actually kind of amazing. Better than what you probably ate today, better than what's in your fridge right now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me your city and what time it is there. I'm always curious who's falling asleep in like 3 AM Ohio or midday Melbourne. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing outside a long wooden hall on a misty evening. The sky is a sleepy slate grey, and there's smoke curling lazily from a vent in the thatched roof. The scent is the first thing you notice. Warm, heavy, spiced, like roasted fat mixed with cloves, garlic, and something sweet you can't quite place. You're cold, a bit damp, and very hungry. A man in rough wool pushes open a pair of creaking doors, and light spills out, orange and flickering. Inside, it's loud in a comforting way. Boots on wooden floors, laughter, dogs barking under the table, a harp playing something vaguely mournful in the corner. You step in and feel the heat rush toward your face. The walls are hung with faded tapestries and bunches of drying herbs, sage, rosemary, lavender, all tied with a string. Candles and torches burn with a smokiness that clings to your clothes instantly. Welcome to dinner. You find your place at the long central table. It's scarred with knife marks and beer stains, but who cares? In front of you there's no plate, just a thick slab of yesterday's bread, called a trencher. It's stale on purpose, meant to soak up whatever lands on it. Beside it, a heavy wooden mug filled with something warm and frothy. Ale, probably. Water's not a thing you want to risk. Someone slams a platter onto the table with theatrical flair. Roast duck, glistening and stuffed with apples. The skin's golden, and the scent hits like a fistful of cloves and sage. Next to it, a bowl of lentils stewed with garlic and onion, barely holding their shape in a thick broth. You dig in with your fingers because forks are still decades away from becoming common. Knives are expected, but you forgot yours. No one judges, except the hound under the table, who's already licking your boot in anticipation. And here's the thing, the food is good, not just passable, not just for the time, genuinely, shockingly good. The duck is crispy where it should be, the apples are soft and cinnamon-touched. The lentils are savoury and earthy and peppered with something that tastes almost lemony. Maybe sumac, maybe just a wild herb. Someone hands you a boiled egg dyed blue with a cabbage water, as if that's a completely normal thing. And to them it is. You take a sip of the ale. It's flat and warm, yes, but also malty and rich. Slightly sour, but not in a bad way. It actually pairs well with the food, like a fermented barley tea with a mild bite of hops. A serving boy offers you a honey cake, but you wave him off for now. You want more duck. So what makes this food so good? Well, for starters, everything here was cooked today, or preserved in a way that made it last without tasting like despair. There are no artificial flavours, no deep freezers. The chicken was clucking this morning. The herbs were snipped an hour ago. And the cook, she's not some nameless servant. She's a master of this world, mixing spices like a wizard and coaxing flavour from a stone if she has to. You take a moment to look around. No one's in a rush. The feast goes on for hours. People eat, then sing, then eat again. This isn't a fuel stop, it's the day's main event. And not just for the nobles either. Even peasants would gather around a communal pot at the end of the day, stirring oats and cabbage, and maybe, just maybe, a precious sliver of bacon. It was still a ritual. It still mattered. Here's a strange but true detail. They sometimes use cinnamon in meat stews, and not in a let's get experimental kind of way. It was normal. They believed warming spices balanced the body, made it stronger, even helped your humours stay in check. And, surprise, it kind of works. That duck stew with a touch of cinnamon? A revelation. Scholars still debate what medieval meals actually tasted like. We have the recipes, sure, written in rhymed verse or jumbled Middle English, but ingredient amounts, techniques, not always clear. Some say the food was overspiced to mask rot. Others argue the opposite, that they had such pride in ingredients the spice was about status, not cover-up. You sip your ale and decide the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Like most things. You lean back against the carved bench, full and warm, while someone passes around a bowl of dried cherries soaked in wine. The harpist has switched to something cheerful now, almost playful. A dog steals someone's bone and trots away like royalty. Your hands are sticky, your lips are oily, and yet you're deeply, peacefully satisfied. You look down at the trencher, soggy now, dark with duck fat and lentil broth. You pick it up and take a bite. It's incredible, soft in the middle, chewy at the crust. Everything the sauce touched has turned it into something completely different, like edible memory foam. The man next to you burps loudly and wipes his mouth on his sleeve. He nods at you, offers a gnawed apple slice. You decline politely. He shrugs and eats it himself, and just like that, you realise you've eaten better tonight than you have in weeks, maybe months. No preservatives, no plastic, just food, real food, messy, fragrant, rich with history. You stifle a yawn. The fire's crackling behind you now. The dogs are quiet. The harp has stopped. The servers have slowed. Your stomach is full, your hands are sticky, your eyes are heavy, and dinner is just getting started. You wake up with the distinct sensation that you've been marinated in duck fat. The hall is quieter now, but not empty. A few stragglers still sit around the dying fire, sipping something dark and syrupy from little clay cups. The smell that first greeted you, clove, roast meat, and something faintly floral, is still here, only now it's mixed with a smoky afterglow and the unmistakable tang of spilled ale. Someone stirs the coals and a bright orange ember crackles, sending a whiff of heat and wood smoke swirling toward you. And then, as if summoned, a new dish appears, a platter of dried figs, fresh cheese, and something that smells like it was imported from an entirely different planet. You lean in closer. It's a dish seasoned with saffron, vivid, golden, earthy. A tiny pinch colours the whole bowl like sunlight melted into food. It's rice, you think, or barley? Hard to tell. It's buttery and floral, and honestly, it tastes like what you always imagined royalty would eat in some storybook you half remember from childhood. The spice is subtle but deep, and it's not alone. You spot little black specks in the dish. Pepper, but real pepper. Strong and sharp and almost fruity. Here's the thing. None of this stuff grew around here. Not the saffron and not the pepper. Not the cinnamon tucked into that weirdly sweet lamb dish being passed around. These spices came from far away. India, the Middle East, even Africa. That's thousands of miles away without planes, trains, or Amazon Prime. And still, they're here. Not everywhere, of course. Only on tables like this, where status bleeds into food. Because back in the Middle Ages, spices were more than just flavour. They were wealth. A single pouch of cloves could buy you a goat. A pound of nutmeg, enough to renovate your entire thatched roof life. People locked spices in special boxes. They guarded them like treasure. Some even wore little spice pouches around their necks like medieval perfume. Saffron was worth more than gold by weight. Let that sink in the next time you spill turmeric on your countertop. You sip from a goblet filled with mulled wine, red, warm, steeped with herbs and citrus peel. It tastes like heat and sweetness had a long conversation and decided to throw a party. Clove burns a little at the back of your throat. Cinnamon curls at the edge of your tongue. And floating near the surface is a tiny star-shaped pod. Star anise, maybe, or something even stranger. You swish it gently, watching the herbs float like an apothecary's dream. And then you realise something a little uncomfortable. These spices didn't just float into Europe like stardust. They came through trade routes soaked in politics, danger, and, violence. From the Silk Road to the Indian Ocean spice trade, every grain of black pepper on your barley stew travelled through the hands of merchants, sailors, soldiers, and sometimes pirates. Entire empires schemed over cinnamon. Crusaders tasted Middle Eastern food, fell in love with it, and brought the recipes and the demand for flavour back home. This meal is delicious, but it's also complicated. Still, tonight's not for guilt. It's for understanding. And tonight you understand that even in the 13th or 14th century, food was global. Maybe not for everyone, but certainly for the ones with silver goblets and golden knives. The dish didn't just say, "I'm tasty." It just screamed, "Look how far my cook will go to impress you." A man in an embroidered tunic sits across from you. His fingers are stained orange from saffron rice, and he grins with a mouthful of something sticky and sweet. He's telling a story about a merchant ship that capsized off the coast of Sicily carrying a cargo of cinnamon. The entire shoreline smelled like Christmas for a week, he says. Probably not true, but who's going to correct him? The mood is warm, lazy, indulgent. Someone sets down a bowl of pears poached in red wine and dusted with powdered ginger. You don't even question the pairing, you just eat. Now here's a quirky fact. Medieval people believed certain spices could protect you from plague. Not kidding. Pepper in your pockets, cloves in your wine, cinnamon on everything. Doctors even wore those spooky beaked masks stuffed with herbs to keep the bad air out. It wasn't science, but it was an effort. You imagine walking through a city that smells like a gingerbread house, while everyone nervously sprinkles nutmeg into their porridge and hopes not to die. Comforting in a weird way. There's some debate among historians about how common these spices actually were. Some argue they were strictly luxury items, out of reach for anyone without land or titles. Others point to evidence that even middle-class townsfolk might splurge on saffron or pepper for special occasions, weddings, feasts, major holidays. Spices may have been rare, but they weren't mythical. They were aspirational, like having a designer handbag or a fridge with a touchscreen today. You didn't need it, but if you had it, you felt it. As the night deepens, more dishes pass under your nose. A stew rich with cardamom and almonds, roast rabbit glazed with honey and lavender, pickled turnips with a clove-studded apple at the centre. There's no shame in mixing sweet and savoury here. In fact, it's expected. The medieval palate loved contrast. Hot and cold, sweet and sour, tender and crisp. No dish stood alone. Every flavour was part of a performance. A medieval meal was a symphony. And the spices? The instruments? Eventually someone pulls out a delicate wooden box and opens it with exaggerated ceremony. Inside, 3 tiny glass vials. One filled with powdered cinnamon, one with saffron threads, and one with tiny dried flower buds. The crowd leans in, gasps politely. You do too. It's ridiculous. It's wonderful. It's a reminder that this isn't just dinner. This is theatre, diplomacy, art, and you're lucky to be here. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear it whistling through the cracks in the hall, rattling a wooden shutter somewhere near the rafters. The fire flares a little as someone throws on more logs. You finish your last bite of rice and lean back, half dazed. The spices are warming you from the inside out. You feel heavy in the best possible way. A dog settles against your leg. The harpist plucks a few sleepy notes. The candle beside you flickers lower. And you wonder, when did we stop cooking like this? When did food stop being sacred? The next course doesn't arrive so much as erupt. With a crash of tankards and a burst of laughter, a fresh wave of dishes storms the table like a well-rehearsed cavalry. First comes the meat. Always the meat. A giant platter of venison glistening with rendered fat and dusted with crushed juniper berries. Then a beef roast that has been larded with bacon, giving it a glossy striped appearance that looks weirdly modern. A handful of serving boys dragging a boar's head, jaw opener in a menacing snarl, its tusks polished and eyes stuffed with what might be cherries. You hope they're cherries. Everyone claps, but not ironically. You're expected to clap for food here. And this isn't just a one-plate situation. The courses keep coming layered and staggered, in a sequence that doesn't bother with our modern ideas of appetizer or entree. There's no salmon with tiny green dots, no delicate plating with edible flowers and foam, just abundance. The medieval feast is a marathon, not a sprint, and every dish has a story. Or at least everyone here pretends it does. You reach for a trencher that's already starting to soften beneath a mound of beef stew, and find yourself elbow deep in sauce. It's thick, laced with cinnamon and mace coloured dark by blood and wine. The meat falls apart with no resistance. And you start to wonder how people back then could afford to eat like this. The answer is they couldn't. Not every day. This is a feast. Reserved for holy days, weddings, visits from nobles. The kind of meal people talked about for months after. Maybe even wrote poetry about. Or carved into the church pews if they were dramatic enough. There's a thin distinction in medieval Europe between a feast and a spectacle. They kind of blend together. Eating isn't a private affair, it's public, performative. The whole point is to show off. You're not just filling your belly. You're displaying your wealth, your generosity, your status. And nothing says, I have arrived, like roasted swan encased in a pastry coffin. Yes, a pastry coffin. That's what they called it. An edible shell designed to trap juices, aromas, and bragging rights. You chew a bite of pork pie that's unexpectedly laced with dried apricots. The crust is dense, almost armour-like, but the filling melts on your tongue, rich, sweet, salty. You glance around, half expecting someone to offer you a palate cleanser, but instead a wooden bowl of garlic-heavy onion soup is placed directly beside your meat plate. No transition, just keep eating. You think about how everything tastes like something. Nothing here is bland. Every bite is layered, smoky, sour, spiced. It's not subtle, but it's not chaotic either. Someone knew what they were doing, and that someone was probably a master cook, trained under another master cook, working off recipes that were passed down like sacred texts. People didn't just guess. They had manuals, handwritten cookbooks filled with tips, like use rosewater only with almond milk, or add ginger when the meat is cold. It wasn't random, it was art. And here's a fact to chew on. Those cookbooks, most were written not for peasant women or kitchen helpers, but for noble households. For men. Male cooks in noble courts were celebrities. They travelled. They bragged. They sometimes even got pensions from royalty. Meanwhile, the women ran the kitchens in the homes of everyone else, quietly, expertly, with zero applause. Back at the table, a man in a fur-lined tunic attempts to carve the boar's head with a knife, shaped more like a small sword. He fails spectacularly. Meat slips, a cherry eye flies across the table, and someone shouts something in Middle French that you're pretty sure means, "Use the other knife, idiot!" Laughter follows. No one's offended. This is how feasts go. Loud, messy, unapologetic. Meanwhile, a small terrier is trying to jump onto the table. No one stops it. It's probably nobility. And next to you, a woman with a veil trailing down her back pours you a drink from a jug that smells faintly of apples and yeast. It's cider. Light, tart, and surprisingly fresh. It cuts through the richness like a blade. You raise your cup in thanks. She doesn't smile, just nods, and returns to her eel tart. Yes, eel. Don't ask. It's actually good. There's a common myth that medieval people didn't know how to eat well, that everything was overcooked, underseasoned, or disguised to hide rot. But here's the scholarly twist. That's mostly garbage. Recent analysis of medieval recipes, archaeology, and even carbon dating of food scraps shows that people, especially in well-off households, valued fresh ingredients and took immense pride in flavour. The idea that everything was gross is a later invention, a way for post-Renaissance people to look smarter and cleaner. But here, in this hall, you realise medieval folks had taste. Quirky fact incoming. One of the most popular sauces back then was called verjuice. It's made from the juice of unripe grapes or sour apples. Tart. Sharp, citrus adjacent. They used it like we use vinegar or lemon today, especially on fatty meats. You taste it now drizzled over a roast goose leg. It's oddly modern, like something you'd find in a food truck dish called neo-feudal BBQ. But as you eat, you start to notice something else. Something we've kind of forgotten in modern food culture. Time. Not just cooking time, but eating time. No one here is rushing. Plates come when they're ready. Conversation drifts between courses. Someone starts a riddle game. Someone else juggles apples until one falls and rolls into the fire. The mood isn't efficiency, it's presence. You're here. You're eating. That's the whole point. And the firelight, the flicker of candles, the creak of wooden benches, none of it is background noise. It's part of the flavour. It settles into the food, into your clothes, into your memory. You pick up another slice of pigeon pie, yes, pigeon, and realise something absurd. You're already nostalgic for this, and you're still here. The harpist returns, this time with a flute. The tune is light, winding, like a lullaby that forgot how to end. You don't recognise the melody, but it fills the hall like a warm draught. You lean back, chew. Slowly, and for a moment, let the noise blur into background hum. The food, the music, the spice-slick fingers, it all fades into something soft, something ancient. There's still more to come. Of course there is. You've barely reached the midpoint of the meal, but for now you're full in every sense of the word. You wake from a light doze with a piece of pigeon pie still halfway to your mouth. The air has shifted. It's thicker now, warmer, filled with the low murmurs of people settling into the long, slow middle stretch of the feast. The candles have melted into little puddles around their wicks. The hearth's glow is steady and deep, and someone just belched a 7-note masterpiece across the hall that garners actual applause. Around you, half-drained platters are being cleared and replaced. You rub your eyes and stretch, only to realise your elbow is stuck to a smear of quince paste. Classic. What comes next, though, is unexpected. A much smaller bowl than before passed gently down the line, cupped reverently in the hands of each diner. Inside it? Pottage. That word doesn't exactly inspire glamour, but you're intrigued. It's a peasant dish, unmistakably. No golden crust, no spice-crusted roast. Just a simple thick stew of barley, leeks, carrots, and something green that might be cabbage, or might be an herb nobody bothered naming. It smells good. Not explosive, but comforting. Like a kitchen that's been simmering all day in quiet dignity. You lift a spoonful to your mouth and are hit with warmth. Not spice, not heat, just depth. The grains are soft and nutty. The leeks melt on your tongue. There's a whisper of garlic, a hint of thyme. You expected blandness. You were wrong. It's the kind of food that makes you stop talking for a minute, makes your shoulders drop, makes your stomach relax like it just took a deep breath. And suddenly, you're rethinking everything you assumed about what peasants ate. Because here's the reality: while nobles feasted on peacock in pastry, most of medieval Europe ran on pottage. Every household had their version. Some with meat, some without, some with barley or rye, some with turnips or kale. It was the original whatever's in the pot meal, endlessly flexible, constantly evolving. And because it simmered all day over a low fire, it developed flavour slowly, patiently. It wasn't cuisine, it was survival. But also, kind of genius. You close your eyes and let your senses focus. The wood smoke clings to your clothes, the warmth of the bowl radiates through your hands. You feel grounded, like you've just returned from a long journey, even though you've barely left the bench. This is what comfort food meant before casseroles and mac and cheese. It wasn't creamy, it wasn't cheesy, it was earthy, real, cooked with instinct and whatever could be pulled from the garden or scraped from the cellar. Now here's something strange. The bread that comes with the pottage is coarse, dark and dense. It's called maslin, a mix of rye and wheat and whatever else was available that year. It's chewy, sour and still warm from the hearth oven. You tear off a piece and dip it into the stew, watching it soften just enough before popping it into your mouth. This isn't the sad, crusty heel of a loaf we throw out today. This bread is the star. It soaks up broth like it's absorbing memory. And then there's the butter. You don't expect butter here. But a small wooden bowl appears, filled with something golden, flecked with herbs. You spread a bit on the warm bread and blink in surprise. It's creamy and sharp, like they churned it by hand, which they probably did, and added a pinch of salt and chopped wild garlic. It's rustic, yes, but honestly, it would sell out at a farmer's market in 2 seconds. There's a fringe fact for you. In some regions, peasant women were the primary keepers of local food culture. They knew what herbs to use for both flavour and healing. They passed down recipes orally, sometimes through song, like actual songs about soup. These women weren't just home cooks, they were walking cookbooks, herbalists and kitchen engineers. They didn't have saffron, but they knew exactly how to make a handful of dried nettles taste like comfort. One of them, an older woman with a wide face and apron stiff with flour, walks past your bench, ladling out more pottage to the men grumbling about a dry venison dish from earlier. She doesn't speak, just works, efficient, calm. Her ladle drips quietly into each bowl, and when she reaches you, she offers the smallest nod. You return it with a full heart. Historians argue about how nutritious this food was. Some claim medieval peasants were malnourished, their diets lacking in protein and variety. Others counter that pottage, with its rotating cast of vegetables, grains and occasional meats, was more balanced than we think, especially compared to modern ultra-processed diets. Sure, you're not getting vitamin C in winter, but you're getting fibre, slow carbs, and whatever minerals hide inside a turnip. A boy wanders past you with a basket of onions strung together like garlands. Another carries bunches of dried sage and bay leaves, their scents trailing behind like medieval potpourri. They're probably kitchen helpers sent to replenish the herbs, or maybe they're just trying to stay warm. Either way, it feels real, unscripted, honest. By now the main table is quieter. People are eating slower. Some have slumped against the wall with their tankards half full. You watch as someone dips a piece of bread directly into the pottage bowl, and then into a cup of ale. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Apparently it's a thing. Here's the funny part. You're no longer longing for the exotic spice stuff from earlier. Not right now, you're happy with this. The humble stuff. The slow-cooked, deeply flavoured, cabbage-scented, barley-thickened comfort in a bowl. And isn't that kind of beautiful? That the low food of the past is still somehow perfect in its own way? You look around and wonder how many people ate meals like this after long days in fields or workshops. How many little families sat around fire pits, bowls in hand with nothing but embers and silence? How many of them, like you now, felt briefly inexplicably safe? It's not flashy, it's not Instagrammable, but it fills you up in a way you didn't expect. Eventually, someone signals for the next course, probably more meat or a custard or some elaborately moulded jelly. But you hesitate. Your bowl is nearly empty. There's just a little pottage left, cooled and thickened, clinging to the sides like a final whisper. You scoop it up with a piece of muslin, savouring the quiet graininess. One last bite. You exhale. Your eyes close. A dog snores nearby. Somewhere someone yawns so loudly it echoes, and you think, if this was the last thing I ate, that would be okay. By now the bread has started to take centre stage, which is strange, because it's not like anyone here is trying to impress you with some fluffy white loaf. No perfectly scored sourdoughs or baguettes cut on a bias. Just bread. Coarse, dark, dense as a stone in your hand. And yet, as another trencher is placed before you, this one still warm, with steam rising faintly from its cracked top, you realise something important. Medieval bread wasn't an afterthought. It was the foundation of every meal, and sometimes literally the plate. You tear off a chunk and examine it. It's not uniform. The crust is tough, browned from baking against the stone walls of the communal oven, maybe even carrying the ghost of yesterday's loaves. Inside it's sour, chewy, flexed with bits of bran and tiny seeds. Not delicate, not airy. This is working bread. The kind that survives in a sack for a week without turning to mush. The kind that gets better when it soaks up fattened broth and spills and survives the abuse of a feast where half the people eat like they're sword fighting. You glance at your new trencher. It's not really food yet. It's still just your edible plate. Trencher bread is usually baked the day before, intentionally dried out so it won't collapse under stew or meat or whatever sticky sweet sauce someone slaps onto it. You pile on some stewed carrots, a slice of goose, a few roasted shallots, and go to work. Gradually, as the sauces sink in, the trencher softens, becomes spoonable, becomes treasure. It's funny. People think of bread today as something basic. You pick it up in a plastic sleeve, pre-sliced, probably with a sell-by date 2 weeks out. But back then, bread was a science and an identity. Where you lived determined what kind of bread you ate. What you could afford determined the grain. In the cities, if you were rich, you might get fine white wheat bread, soft and fluffy, practically cake. If you were poor, maslin or rye, or even bread made from peas or beans ground into flour. And then there's the really desperate stuff. Acorn bread, bark bread, things that make modern toast look like a miracle. But here's the quirky truth. People didn't always eat their trencher. In noble feasts like this, once you were done with the stuff on top, you just left the bread. That's right, didn't eat it. It got collected, stacked, and either given to the poor or fed to dogs. In a weird way, the trencher was both food and offering. A built-in donation to the hungry, or to the hounds. You look across the meal. Someone is using their trencher like a napkin, wiping their greasy fingers across the crust before tossing it to a mutt skulking near the fire. The dog catches it mid-air. No one blinks. This is just how it works. Now, medieval kitchens, especially in towns, were built around bread. Communal ovens were everything. If you didn't have one, you paid to use someone else's. People carried their shaped dough to the baker's oven, had it marked with a family sigil, and returned later to collect it. Imagine trusting your daily bread to someone else's fire. It sounds strange now, but back then it was the heartbeat of the neighbourhood. Bread was so central that it sparked laws, riots, even revolutions when prices climbed too high or quality slipped. You take another bite, this time from a loaf someone hands you from the hearth. It's barley bread, a bit coarse, with a sour tang that cuts through the richness of your meal. A thin smear of goose fat melts on it like butter. It's rustic and satisfying in a way nothing store-bought could ever be. The kind of thing that fills you up and slows you down. There's a woman beside you now, no older than 30, holding a basket filled with half-sliced loaves. She's trading them. 1 piece of barley bread for a pinch of smoked salt, 2 for a scrap of dried apple. You watch as hands stretch out from all sides, making offers. She negotiates like a merchant, quick and sharp. This isn't just food, this is currency. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. Bread was literally a unit of social measurement. The word companion comes from the Latin companis, meaning with bread. If you shared your bread with someone, they were family, friend, someone you protect. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was society. Scholars have long debated the symbolic role of bread in medieval life. Was it merely food, or was it sacred? After all, this is the era when bread and wine were also central to religious ritual. In a village, a broken loaf on the table could mean peace. A full one placed at the church altar could be an offering, a mouldy one, a threat. There are records of people being excommunicated for stealing a single roll. Imagine losing your place in heaven over a dinner roll. Back in the hall, things are winding into the next course, but no one seems in a hurry to move past the bread. Maybe it's the warmth of the hearth, or the weight in your belly, or just the satisfaction of food that doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. There's no garnish, no surprise filling, just grain, water, salt, fire and thyme. You could live off this. People did. You pause and think about how many hands it took to make that one loaf. Someone milled the grain, maybe with a hand quern or at the town's watermill. Someone mixed it by hand, kneading until their arms ached. Someone tended the oven, kept the temperature just right, rotated the loaves so they didn't burn on one side. It took hours, days. And here you are, tearing off another piece like it's nothing. You look down. Your trencher is soft now, soaked through with drippings, flecked with mustard seeds and goose fat. It's not just a plate anymore. It's pudding, wet pudding, but not the sweet kind. The kind you eat in silence, scraping every last bite from the edge of your wooden bowl because it tastes like everything you've had up to now. Collected, merged, transformed. One of the servers tries to clear your trencher, assuming you're done. You shake your head. Not yet. You pull the edge toward you and take a final bite. It's soaked, messy, delicious. You'd lick your fingers without shame. Outside you can hear the low rustle of wind. The shutters rattle gently against the stone walls. A dog sighs, and someone somewhere lets out a contented hum as they stretch out beside the fire. The bread is gone, the bowl is empty. You feel full but not heavy, satisfied in a way that feels almost ancestral. You lean back, close your eyes, and for just a moment you swear you can feel the rhythm of the millstone, the warmth of the oven, the rough texture of flour on your fingertips. You're not just eating history, you're inside it. The fire pops loudly as someone throws on a thick log, sending sparks curling upward into the rafters. You're mid-sip of a cloudy golden liquid, slightly yeasty and warm. It's not juice, it's not quite beer either. It's breakfast beer, or at least the medieval version of it. You look down at your mug and realise you've already had 3 refills and haven't touched a drop of water since arriving. That's not an oversight. That's the norm. In medieval Europe, water was for washing clothes, cooling metal, or if you were desperate, feeding the animals. Drinking it? Bold choice. Dangerous, really. Water might carry disease, parasites, or just an alarming number of dead frogs. So instead, you drank beer. Every age, every class, every morning. Not the IPA monster we know today. This was small beer, lightly fermented, low in alcohol, full of grains. It was warm, mild, and hydrating in the safest way people knew. And it was served with breakfast, to children, to nuns, to pretty much anyone with a pulse. You take another sip and notice it's slightly sour, slightly sweet. A kind of medieval Gatorade. A brewer in the corner, covered in malt dust and carrying a copper ladle, nods at your interest. He's been working the same brew recipe for decades, passed down from an uncle who probably got it from a monk who got it from a Roman. That's how beer worked. Quietly, generationally, as much a tradition as it was a beverage. Across the table, a man is spooning out soft curds of cheese onto a slab of bread and pouring beer straight into his bowl like milk. Another dunks a heel of bread in it and sucks it dry with the solemnity of a priest. These aren't weird little rituals. They're daily habits. The medieval breakfast is barely distinguishable from dinner. Bread, cheese, porridge, maybe a boiled egg if you're lucky, and always beer. You're starting to see a pattern here. This world runs on fermentation. Beer for thirst, bread for strength, cheese for survival, and later, wine, ale, vinegar, all born from the same quiet art. Letting things rot in just the right way. It's culinary alchemy, and nobody needed a fridge to do it. You look at your mug again and realise you're not just drinking something old, you're sipping a recipe that helped keep humanity alive. Here's something peculiar. Monks, especially Benedictine monks, were legendary brewers. Their monasteries were like flavour laboratories, clean, disciplined, and shockingly efficient. Some of the earliest beer records come from monastic notes scribbled in Latin, measuring hop ratios and fermentation times with a kind of holy obsession. In some places, monks were even allowed extra pints during fasting days. That's right, fasting didn't mean going hungry, it meant skipping meat and drinking 5 pints of ale instead. You nod respectfully. That's commitment. But back to the beer. There's a curious bitterness in the aftertaste. That's hops. Today it's standard, but back then, hops were still gaining popularity. Before that, brewers used grute, a blend of herbs like yarrow, rosemary and bog myrtle, to flavour and preserve their brew. The switch to hops was controversial. Some thought it tasted too sharp. Others believed it had medicinal properties. Debates brewed, pun intended, and eventually hops won, thanks to their superior shelf life and mysterious ability to keep the beer from exploding in barrels. You feel the buzz now. Not drunkenness, just warmth. The glow of barley and yeast and thyme working together. And everyone else seems to be in the same boat. Easy smiles, slouched shoulders, sleepy contentment. There's something about drinking with people in a hall like this that makes everything feel timeless. No pretense, no brands, just mugs, passed around and refilled, as if hydration were a communal act. Still, this fermented comfort didn't stop at beer. The servers bring out a tart, fizzy beverage in clay cups, cider made from autumn apples and wild yeast. It's crisp, sharp, and wakes your palate with a jolt of fruit and acid. Some say it was safer than beer in orchard-rich regions. Easier to make, easier to love. You take a second sip and suddenly you're craving something rich and salty, like cheese, which of course arrives right on cue. A platter of cheeses appears, some soft, white and streaked with ash, others crumbly and blue-veined, with the pungent smell of old boots. You hesitate at first, then dive in. The sharpness cuts through the malt in your mouth perfectly, the soft ones melt against the back of your teeth. The rind tastes like cellars and wood smoke. You don't know what half of these are, but they are undeniably good, and there's a scholarly dispute for you. Some argue medieval cheeses were bland, rough, simple. Others insist they were far more complex than we assume, aged in caves, wrapped in herbs, brushed with wine. The problem is, cheese doesn't fossilise well. What we know comes from records, descriptions and best guesses. But the one you're chewing now, this one's confident. Funky, alive. You nibble a wedge of something so strong it numbs your tongue slightly. And remember another odd historical tidbit. In some areas, cheese was considered food for labourers, not nobles, too rustic, too belly. But in monasteries and among certain rural elites it became prized, especially when paired with ale. And suddenly you get it. You take a bite of the cheese, a sip of the beer, and something clicks. Earthy, creamy, bitter, sweet. These flavours don't just complement each other, they make each other make sense. Next comes a dish called mash, a kind of oatmeal for grown-ups. Barley or oats, cooked down with ale, sometimes with a hint of honey, often with an egg stirred in at the end. It's hot, gluey, and exactly what your stomach needs. You drag your spoon through it and realise this too is fermented. The beer isn't just the drink, it's part of the dish. You're practically bathing in yeast at this point. In the far corner, someone's already fallen asleep with his mug clutched to his chest. No one wakes him. It's not a party. It's just life. A rhythm of eating and drinking and letting the fire lull you into that soft edge between full and fading. Outside the hall, you imagine the village waking up to this same breakfast. Bread, beer, cheese. Maybe not the roast goose or the pear and garlic mash, but something hearty. Something brewed, baked and shared. The idea of 3 meals a day didn't really exist yet. People ate when they could. And breakfast, if you were lucky enough to have it, was less about joy and more about fuel. A cold piece of bread, a bit of cheese, a mug of warm beer to cut the chill. You think about your own breakfasts, toast in a rush, coffee that tastes like urgency. And here you are, swaying gently in a hall warmed by stone and steam, sipping ale and nibbling on cheese that smells like it fought a bear to be here. You smile. Maybe this isn't a breakfast you'd want every day, but just for tonight, it feels exactly right. You're pulled out of your cheese and ale stupor by a sudden burst of barking and the unmistakable clatter of boots on stone. The dogs know before you do. Something's coming, something loud, wild and dripping with bravado. The doors at the far end of the hall swing open with a bang, and in stride the hunters, mud-splattered, red-cheeked, smelling of pine sap and triumph. One of them drags a cart behind him, and on it lies the centerpiece of what's coming next. A boar, freshly killed, tusks still glinting, tied with ribbons that feel more decorative than necessary. The room erupts in applause. You've seen roast pork before, but this is not the thing that came in a foil tray from your cousin's birthday party. This is primal, majestic, and somehow hilarious. The boar looks simultaneously threatening and festive, like someone dressed up a small warlord and shoved him in the oven. The kitchen staff descends upon it with glee, sharpening knives and shouting orders. You're not sure who's in charge, but the energy crackles like it's opening night at the theatre. You watch as the cooks begin their work. Butchering a boar isn't elegant. It's work. Sinew, bone, fat, each slice revealing meat the colour of bruised garnet, streaked with creamy marbling. The head is removed first, and in true medieval flair will be served separately, likely as some kind of statement piece, or centrepiece, or, honestly, intimidation tactic. The rest of the meat is rubbed with mustard, rosemary, garlic, and a suspiciously large amount of salt. And yes, salt was a flex. In an age without refrigeration, salt was life. A way to preserve meat, enhance flavour, and, if used liberally enough, prove you could afford it. You watch the boar being packed in it like an ancient edible mummy. Then comes the spit, a massive iron rod skewered through its entire length, hoisted over the fire, slowly turned by a boy who looks like he hasn't blinked since breakfast. Here's a fact you didn't expect to learn tonight. Boar was considered elite meat. Not just for its taste, but for the danger involved in hunting it. These animals could kill you. Literally. People died trying to impress their in-laws with wild pork. The tusks were like daggers, the temper foul, and the forests they lived in. Well, let's just say GPS wasn't a thing. So bringing home a boar was like returning from battle. And the feast that followed? Part trophy ceremony. Part thank God you lived party. Someone places a bowl in front of you filled with boar blood, wine, vinegar, and herbs. It's a sauce, you think? Maybe. It smells like cloves and onions and iron. You're not sure if you're supposed to dip something in it or drink it, but the guy next to you is already dunking his meat with reckless abandon, so you follow suit. It's surprisingly good. Tangy, rich, a little metallic, like drinking stew and wine at the same time. Here comes the quirky bit. In some households, the boar's head was served with a literal apple in its mouth, and sometimes its skin was sewn back on and decorated with gold leaf. That's right. They'd cook the meat, strip the skin, prepare everything, and then reassemble the animal like a horrifying meat puzzle, just to impress guests. You hope tonight's cooks are more merciful. You get a slice of the roast, carved thick and juicy, with skin so crisp it crackles under your knife. It smells of smoke and herbs and distant thunder. The first bite is a revelation. Savoury, slightly sweet with a gamey edge that reminds you this animal once ran through forests, not factories. You chew slowly, deliberately. It tastes like the woods, like danger and triumph and rosemary. This is meat that had to be earned. Of course, not everyone ate like this. Boar was the luxury. The real meat of the masses was pork, from domesticated pigs raised in backyards or allowed to forage through village streets. But the flavour, not far off. Medieval pigs were leaner, wilder, often salted or tobaccoed to last through winter. And when they couldn't be preserved, they were eaten fast. Boiled, roasted, stewed in thick pots with onions, vinegar, and whatever herbs grew nearby. There's a scholarly debate about how often people ate meat at all. Some argue it was rare, reserved for samedis or feast days. Others claim peasants in some regions had regular access to pork, chicken or rabbit, especially in rural areas where small-scale farming was common. Either way, when meat was served, it was never wasted. Every part used, every bone boiled, every scrap devoured or saved. Back in the hall, you notice the roasting process isn't just cooking, it's performance. The turning of the spit is rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The basting, done with bunches of rosemary dipped in fat, sends waves of scent through the hall that makes your stomach growl despite everything you've already eaten. The room is half asleep and half rapture, lulled by fire and flavour and the soothing crackle of dripping fat. The boy at the spit, now glazed in sweat and soot, still hasn't blinked. He turns the boar like his life depends on it. Maybe it does. Maybe this is a rite of passage, a way to earn your place in the kitchen hierarchy. If nothing else, he's going to smell like roast pork for a week, and honestly, there are worse fates. You turn back to your plate, more slices appear. One drizzled with honey and vinegar, another sprinkled with crushed juniper and pine needles, a third wrapped in bacon. The flavours are bold, unashamed. You start to realise that medieval cuisine wasn't trying to be subtle. It wanted you to feel it, to taste the forest, to know the animal had lived, run, fought, and finally been honoured. A man stands to toast. He raises his goblet, red with wine, and begins to speak in a booming voice about the glory of the hunt, the generosity of the host, and the blessings of the table. You understand about half of it, maybe less. But when everyone raises their mugs and shouts something in chorus, you follow suit. You clink your cup with the person next to you, whose breath smells like roast garlic and happiness. You chew slower now, savouring. Somewhere, a lute begins to play a tune that's oddly cheerful for a room full of people gnawing on wild pig. A woman refills your mug. Someone passes a plate of pickled pears. The dogs are quiet. Even the fire feels calmer, settled. And as you finish the last bite of your perfectly imperfect slice of boar, you think, this is how food tells stories. Not just through taste, but through effort, through danger, through shared noise and burnt fingers and spit roasting under torchlight. You lean back against the bench, your hands greasy, your belly full, and your eyelids heavy. You've eaten a piece of the forest tonight, and you survived it. The hall has quieted into that soft lull between roars of laughter and clinks of tankards, the part of the evening when the heat settles into your bones and everything moves slower. Your plate sits in front of you, streaked with gravy and grease, and your hands are gloriously sticky. You're halfway through licking your thumb when you hear it, the faint, rhythmic thump of something heavy being kneaded. Somewhere behind the curtain that separates the kitchen from the great hall, someone is working dough like they're trying to exorcise a demon. And the smell wafting out, yeast, warm milk, caramelized sugar, pulls you toward it like a dream. You get up, quietly, carefully, weaving past slumped nobles and passed-out hounds, until you duck behind the tapestry and enter the kitchen. It's chaos. Controlled, beautiful chaos. Pots boiling over, smoke curling from a clay oven's chimney, every surface dusted with flour, breadcrumbs, and the occasional leak. At the centre, a group of monks in rolled-up sleeves and sweat-soaked tunics are working in complete harmony. One stirs a cauldron of bubbling jam, another rotates wheels of cheese stored under damp cloths. A third, your favourite, is kneading dough with the kind of religious intensity you'd expect from a man reciting scripture. Welcome to the monastery kitchen. You hadn't planned to wander in here, but you're glad you did. The monks nod as you step closer, not minding your presence. They know you're not here to cause trouble. You're just chasing the scent of whatever miracle they're making tonight. Here's something most people forget. Medieval monks weren't just about prayers and quiet contemplation. They were also culinary powerhouses. Their lives were ruled by routine, sure, hours for prayer, hours for study, but also hours for brewing, baking, preserving, and yes, innovating. In a world where time moved slowly and silence was part of the job, monks found their voice in food. And the food they made? Legendary. You pass by shelves lined with glass jars full of preserved herbs, dried rose petals, and something that looks like dehydrated citrus rind. Every container is labelled in careful Latin script, and the whole room smells like a medieval apothecary met a candy shop. One of the monks gestures toward a vat near the hearth. Inside is a dark liquid that smells sweet and strong, like apples, wood smoke, and bad decisions. You're told it's fruit brandy distilled from leftover cider and quince mash. You're also told, gently, that you probably shouldn't drink more than a sip unless you're okay with forgetting the rest of the week. You sip it anyway. It burns. Immediately. It sets a tiny fire down your throat and then settles into your belly like a candle being lit from the inside. And just like that, you're wide awake again. But the monks don't stop there. They're brewing ale in a copper pot that hisses with steam, churning butter in a wooden barrel the size of a wine cask, and slicing pears to dry on racks above the fire. Nothing goes to waste here. Nothing is rushed. You sit on a stool close enough to the heat to feel your face flush, and watch one monk carefully mould cheese using a carved wooden press. He sprinkles it with thyme and sets it aside, probably to age for weeks in a cool cellar where time turns milk into magic. Monastic kitchens were more than efficient. They were scientific, experimental. The monks had access to books, often translated from Arabic texts, that described herbs, minerals, and techniques unknown to the average cook. They documented their successes, learned from failures, and improved on recipes with monkish patience. In many ways, they were the first true food nerds, unapologetically obsessed with precision. There's a quiet debate among historians about just how advanced monastic food culture really was. Some say it has been over-romanticised, that monks cooked well, but mostly for their own sustenance. Others argue they were responsible for preserving food knowledge that might have been lost during periods of war and upheaval. You're inclined to believe the latter, especially when you bite into a piece of fresh cheese so tangy and buttery, it tastes about me like a dairy miracle. Here's your fringe fact. Some monasteries kept bees not just for honey, but for wax, used in both candles and as a sealant for cheese aging, which means that little wheel of goat cheese you're holding might have been coated in bee-scented wax, aged in stone chambers, and flipped daily by candlelight. It's the kind of care we reserve today for luxury cars and emotionally fragile cats. One monk taps your shoulder and points to a clay pot in the corner. You open it and immediately recoil. It's garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like a haunted harbour. They're experimenting with it, trying to recreate a Roman recipe using anchovies, salt and thyme. You admire the commitment. You do not try it. As you move through the kitchen, you notice that everything here is based on seasons. What's ripe now, what can be preserved for winter, what needs drying, smoking, pickling. There's no concept of a year-round tomato. You eat what the land gives you, and when it doesn't give, you adapt. A monk hands you a small tart filled with dried figs and chestnuts, glazed with honey, and sprinkled with ground anise. It tastes like spiced candlelight, sweet, earthy, and just the right amount of chewy. And then the best part of the kitchen, above the fireplace, hanging from iron hooks and wooden beams. Strings of herbs and sausages, bundles of garlic, racks of drying apples. It's not decoration, it's dinner in progress. Even the air here is part of the process, flavouring everything with a mix of smoke, spice and quiet monastic ambition. Eventually someone rings a bell. The monks gather their tools, clean the boards and begin carrying dishes into the main hall. The feast isn't over. It's just entering its next phase, one flavoured by fig brandy, smoky cheese and the silent brilliance of men who made flavour part of their prayer. You follow them back through the curtain, the warmth of the kitchen still clinging to your clothes, the taste of honey and herbs still dancing on your tongue. You sit down, your seat still warm, and realise no one even noticed you were gone. Except for the dog, who is now sleeping with its nose in your empty mug. And just like that, the next course arrives. Thanks to the monks, it smells like heaven with a pinch of theology. The hall has warmed again, not just from the hearth, but from the steady arrival of courses so indulgent they might cause moral dilemmas in 3 different languages. You're back in your seat, comfortably anchored by the weight of previous dishes and the pleasant thrum of fig brandy still curling through your bloodstream. Conversation hums around you in that lazy, post-savour kind of way, people murmuring about sauces, sharing bites across the table, comparing roast temperatures like they're debating theology. And then a platter appears, so absurdly luxurious that everyone actually goes quiet for a moment. It's a goose, not just any goose, a goose covered, literally, in gold. The whole thing is brushed with edible leaf so thin it flutters when someone exhales near it. You blink. You look at the person next to you. They blink. Someone leans in and whispers, "That's for real." As in actual gold. Eaten for no nutritional reason whatsoever, except to scream, "I can." You've heard of food as status before, but this is something else. The goose gleams in the candlelight like a roasted trophy. It's trussed with delicate ropes of pastry and studded with cloves arranged in star patterns. There's a fig stuffed in its mouth, dripping honey and pine nuts. Even the platter is ornate, silver inlaid with etchings of birds, like you need a thematic reminder of what you're about to destroy. A man carves it with exaggerated ceremony, pulling off slivers of golden skin with the grace of someone who's done this for a king, at least once. A small slice lands on your trencher. It glows like treasure. You hesitate, half expecting a curse or maybe just indigestion, but when you bite in, oh, it's rich, buttery, crisp skin that gives way to tender, herby meat, and the faint metallic whisper of actual gold leaf, which has the flavour of absolutely nothing and the price tag of a small horse. And this wasn't unusual. In some circles, eating gold wasn't just a flex. It was believed to have health benefits, balance the humours, brighten the complexion, impress rivals. Medieval physicians, when asked, gave their usual shrugs and said something like, "Sure, if it makes you feel richer, it probably helps." You chew thoughtfully, unsure if you feel any healthier, but definitely more expensive. Around you, more absurd dishes arrive. A meat pie in the shape of a castle, complete with pastry towers and a tiny chicken catapult made from crust. A roasted capon dyed green with parsley and spinach, served with a custard moat. A pastry shaped like a fish, but filled with venison. Culinary riddles were a thing, surprise meats, colour trickery, disguised flavours. This was more than just food. This was pageantry. It was called subtlety, though that's possibly the least accurate name in culinary history. Subtleties were decorative, dramatic dishes meant to astonish, sculpted sugar ships with marzipan sails, pies that released live birds when opened, yes, that nursery rhyme was real, or meat served in layers that resembled the strata of the earth. These weren't just to eat, they were meant to be remembered, talked about, whispered in scandalised awe at the next feast over. And yet, within all this extravagance, you still taste something honest. Because even when dressed in gold, the food here is made with care. That goose, perfectly roasted. The pastry. Castle? Flaky, warm, with a filling that sings of cloves and leeks. There's art beneath the pomp, and skill and fire-warmed sweat. You ask someone how long it takes to make dishes like this. They laugh. All day, sometimes 2, depends on the moon. That last bit might be a joke. Might not. You've stopped trying to separate superstition from seasoning. Around here, both are essential. Here's a curious fact. In some noble households, entire teams were devoted to spectacle. There was the master cook, of course, but also assistants in charge of sauces, dough sculptors, even painters to apply edible gold and coloured glazes. The kitchen was more like a studio, and the dining hall, a stage. There's a growing debate among food historians about how much of this extravagance was actually consumed. Some say these dramatic dishes were for show only, cut, admired, and then quietly carried away. Others insist they were very much eaten, torn apart with fingers and daggers, shared in loud toasts and drunken bets. You're inclined to believe the latter, especially as the man across from you dips a gold-flecked fig into a bowl of almond milk custard with absolutely no shame. More wine flows, red, deep and sweet, flavoured with cinnamon, cardamom and dried rose petals. You sip and taste time itself, folded into fermented grapes and warmed in the same hearth that roasted your last 5 courses. The wine is thick, slightly gritty, clearly not filtered, and still you find yourself reaching for more. Not because you're thirsty, but because everything tonight seems to ask for one more bite, one more sip, one more "you have to try this." Quirky fact incoming. Some nobles took edible gold to extremes. There are records of dishes laced with gold dust, of sauces that shimmered in torchlight, of whole feasts where the goal wasn't fullness, it was sparkle. Even the napkins were embroidered in golden thread. It wasn't just opulence, it was edible mythology. And yet, as the fire crackles and the noise softens to quiet chewing and low, contented swings, something more subtle reveals itself. Beneath the layers of gold, the jokes about pastry towers, the shock and awe roast fowl, there's a yearning here, a desire to turn food into memory, to make a meal that lives longer than the hunger it answered. You break off a final piece of crust from the castle pie, dip it in a pool of spiced fruit syrup and chew slowly. The flavours are heavy, warming. Apples, clove, pepper, maybe a hint of saffron if the cook was feeling generous. You lean back. Someone yawns. Someone else is humming an old song about a baker who stole a princess. You're not sure if it's a lullaby or a confession. Either way, it fits. And as the gold-slick goose is carted off to make room for whatever ridiculous masterpiece is coming next, you realise you're not just full, you're glowing. Maybe it's the wine, maybe it's the fire, maybe it's the tiniest trace of gold leaf clinging to the corner of your mouth. But in this moment, surrounded by feast and laughter and food made for joy, you feel rich in a way that has nothing to do with coins. It's long past the part of the evening when anyone's pretending to pace themselves. Plates now arrive in waves. No fanfare, no carved swan heads or gilded drums of meat. Just honest, deeply seasoned food, the kind you could eat in silence and still feel understood. You blink through the flickering torchlight and realise you've been chewing on a sprig of rosemary, like a contemplative goat. You set it down carefully, and let the new scent take over, something rich and grassy, tangled with wood smoke and the unmistakable bite of wild onions. It's mutton, you think, but not just any mutton. This is a stew, slow, dark and bubbling like it knows things. A wide clay bowl is set in front of you, and a wooden spoon dropped in beside it with no ceremony at all. Inside is a mess of meat and greens, turnips, garlic, parsley, maybe even sorrel, swimming in a broth so thick it clings to the rim of the bowl like it's trying not to leave. You take a bite. The lamb is so tender it dissolves into the spoon before it hits your tongue, and the herbs taste like they were picked with bare hands an hour ago. There's something piney tucked in there, juniper maybe, or some local plant that doesn't even have a modern name. But it works. Oh, it works. You look up expecting everyone to be impressed, but no one's making a fuss. That's how you know this is real food, not performance, just taste. Because outside the gilded geese and sugar castles, this is how people really ate when they wanted something good. Not flashy, not fast, just good. You close your eyes and take another spoonful. This stew tastes like someone's grandmother lives in the walls. And here's the real kicker. This mutton probably came from a sheep raised within walking distance, fed on the same grass that's now flavouring the broth. Herbs gathered from hedgerows, roots pulled from the edge of the woods, garlic that still smells like soil. The cook, likely someone's aunt, or a village matriarch with forearms like rolling pins and an instinct for salt that would shame modern chefs. You step outside briefly to clear your head, or maybe just to breathe something that isn't steam. The air is damp and cool, the ground soft beneath your boots. There's a small herb garden near the edge of the courtyard, barely visible in the moonlight. It's not fancy, just practical. Little mounds of thyme, some struggling sage, wild chives like messy hair sprouting between stones. This is the source, not markets or ships or powdered flavour packets, just dirt, and hands, and time. You bend down and crush a sprig of rosemary between your fingers. It's sharp, peppery, a little resinous. No wonder it shows up in so many dishes. Roasts, stews, even bread. In some places they believed rosemary chased away evil spirits and improved memory. In others it was tucked into pillows to fight nightmares. Tonight it's in your stew, and frankly, doing a better job than any potion could. There's a movement near the edge of the garden, a woman in a faded apron plucking herbs under the moonlight. She doesn't see you at first. She's focused, muttering to herself, shaking dew from the leaves before dropping them into a woven basket. When she does look up, she just nods. Not startled, just acknowledging a fellow traveller in the kingdom of midnight soup. And this is where the real magic happens. Not in castles or monasteries or banquets with edible gold, but right here, under the stars, with a basket of herbs and a pot waiting to simmer. These cooks, mostly women, knew their land like a second language. They knew which plants calmed fevers and which ones made stew sing. They grew calendula for healing, mint for cooling, mugwort to spice up beer. Food was never just about hunger. It was medicine, protection, and comfort. You return to the hall, bowl in hand, and find the conversation has slowed to a warm hum. People are dipping crusts into their stew, murmuring thanks without saying it aloud. This isn't a course, they'd never call it that. It's just what's next. And somehow it feels more intimate than the grand feasts earlier. Less theatre, more hearth. Here's something strange but true. In some villages, certain dishes were only made on specific days. Not for religious reasons, just tradition. Mutton stew on Tuesdays, garlic porridge on Thursdays, duck pies at the full moon. Nobody remembers why, it's just how it's done. And over time, those rhythms built a kind of culinary calendar. One based on seasons, local harvests, and what made sense when you didn't have a refrigerator or a food blog to tell you what was in. You spoon up the last of the stew and swipe the bowl clean with a piece of rough barley bread. It's absorbed everything for fat, herbs, salt. You chew slowly, savouring the final quiet notes. If the earlier dishes were fireworks, this one's a lullaby. Nothing left to prove, just a deep, satisfying exhale in edible form. And here comes the quirky fact of the evening. In some parts of Europe, people believe that what day you ate certain herbs could affect your health for the entire year. Eat leeks on the right day, you'd avoid headaches. Eat them on the wrong day, and you'd offend a local spirit. There was folklore behind everything. How to stir a pot to avoid bad luck. Where to store salt to keep away misfortune. Superstition stirred right into the stew. You stretch your legs under the table. The fire has died down to glowing embers. Someone strums a lyre in the corner half-heartedly. One of the cooks walks by carrying a bundle of herbs tied with twine. She smells like smoke and rosemary and that intangible scent of things being made with care. You yawn. The stew has done its job. You're warm, full, and feeling deeply connected to every root and leaf that made its way into your bowl. This wasn't a showpiece. This was food the way it's meant to be. Made by hand, eaten with reverence, and remembered long after the last bite. You lean back, hands folded over your belly, and close your eyes for just a moment. In that second, you feel the hum of centuries in your bones. This stew has been made 1,000 ways by 1,000 hands, and tonight, you were lucky enough to hold the bowl. Your belly is full, your limbs are heavy, and your brain is melting into a stew-scented fog. You'd think by now, after roasted boar and brandy and goose brushed in gold, the meal might wind down. But no, tonight is a feast shaped like a spiral. Every time you think you've reached the centre, someone adds another layer. And this layer smells fishy. Not bad fishy. Not day-old shrimp-in-the-sun fishy. This is rich, buttery, clean. The sea, if the sea was polite and brought a gift. It's Friday. You only realise that because the man next to you mutters, "Fish again," with a resigned fondness as he dips a chunk of dark rye into a steaming dish of carp baked with figs. Ah, yes. Fish Friday. A ritual so deeply ingrained into medieval life it could practically run its own monastery. On the table now, a glittering array of aquatic options. Carp, pike, eels twisted into golden spirals, and something wrapped in leaves that smells faintly of dill and mystery. And it's not just here because someone had a craving for river snacks. Religious fasting rules were strict, and fish didn't count as meat. Neither did, bafflingly, beavers. But that's another story. Fridays, along with Advent, Lent, and basically half the year, meant no meat. So fish became not just a substitute, it became a canvas for creativity. You scoop up a bite of the carp, it's flaky, light, and then, bam! Sweetness from the figs, a zap of vinegar, and just the faintest tingle of cloves. It's weird. It's wonderful. It makes your face do that involuntary little lift your eyebrows thing like you just heard good gossip. The cook must have spent hours on this. Fish is temperamental, especially freshwater fish like this. It can get muddy or mushy if mishandled. But this was prepped with care, scaled, soaked, probably even massaged in wine before baking. It's swimming in a thick sauce, spiced wine thickened with almond milk and breadcrumbs. It's silky and warming and just sweet enough to make you forget this is technically a fasting meal. And there's a strange irony here. Fasting didn't always mean less. It just meant different. On paper it was a restriction. In practice it turned kitchens into laboratories. No meat? Fine. They'd make mock sausages from fish and nuts, mould almond milk cheese, whip up entire roasts made of pressed fish and breadcrumbs sculpted into bird shapes. Yes, really. When forbidden, the medieval imagination just got louder. A woman across the table pulls apart a golden eel pie. Inside is a tangle of meat, herbs, raisins, and saffron. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs and says, "Fasting food," before taking a bite big enough to break the rules anyway. You try some. It's uncomfortably good. Like, is this allowed good? Here's a fun historical fact. People in the Middle Ages observed over 100 fasting days a year. That's almost half the calendar. But instead of dread, it sparked invention. Many of the era's most elaborate dishes, especially in noble households, were invented to comply with the letter of the law while laughing in the face of its spirit. A trout covered in sugar and cloves? Yes. A herring fried and refried until it tasted like nothing found in water? Definitely. Somehow, in the absence of meat, flavour took over. You sip a mug of warm ale, it doesn't pair with fish, but it's what's available. The bitterness balances the sweetness on your tongue, grounding you. A servant sets down a small bowl of green sauce, parsley, mint, vinegar, and breadcrumbs, meant to cut the oil of the fish. You try it. It stings, in a good way. Sharp, herbal, and aggressive. The Middle Ages had no fear of bold flavour. And now, the fringe fact you've been waiting for. Some medieval monks believed that fish had symbolic purity, closer to the divine than land animals. Eating fish was seen as aligning yourself with holiness, which might explain why the table now feels vaguely reverent, like people are praying through chewing. It's a quiet course, but not solemn, more like contemplative, like everyone's reflecting on how something that once flopped around in a muddy riverbed has now become a bite of poetry. Meanwhile, at the edge of the table, someone is reconstructing a fish skeleton on his trencher, like a jigsaw puzzle. He places the head at one end, arranges the vertebrae in a neat line, and even adds a tail flourish out of parsley. He seems very proud. No one stops him. Medieval feasts weren't just for eating, they were for playing with your food too, but not all was rosy under the fasting rules. There's a scholarly debate about how much the average person actually stuck to the no-meat rules. Some say the peasants didn't care, they ate what they had, rules be damned. Others suggest even the poorest households made an effort, if only because it connected them to the spiritual rhythm of the community. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Eat the salted herring if you have it. If you don't, maybe that dried rabbit is fishy enough. Back in the hall, the harpist plays a tune that sounds like water running over rocks. You don't know if that's intentional, but it suits the course. Someone pours a wine sauce over pickled herring like it's a dessert topping. You feel weirdly fine with that. The air smells like salt and vinegar now, rich with cloves and sweetened onion. Fish oil sizzles somewhere near the hearth, and the scent lingers like memory. You take one last bite of your carp, now completely tangled with fig syrup, and wonder how many rivers it swam through before ending up on this table. A boy comes around with a little bowl of preserved lemon peels, candied and sticky. He offers one like a prize. You accept. It tastes sharp and bright and cuts through everything like a tiny edible reset button. And finally silence again. Not the heavy silence of fullness, but a lighter kind, the pause that says, well, that was oddly delightful, before someone inevitably ruins it with a pun about eels. Which, of course, happens. The man who built the fish skeleton says, that really scaled nicely, didn't it? And groans echo around the table like waves hitting the shore. You smile, shake your head, and reach for your mug. Fasting or not, you're officially hooked. It's somewhere between your 5th mug of ale and your 2nd round of eel puns when the room begins to shift again. Not physically, but emotionally. The laughter fades, not abruptly, but gradually, like a song ending in a long, quiet hum. The servers move slower now, with less clatter. There's no more boasting about the hunt, no comparisons of boar tusks or goose girth. Instead, you sense something approaching, a change in mood, a shift in tone, like the fire itself is holding its breath. This is the part of the feast that separates the living from the legends, hosting a medieval banquet without anyone dying. You might think that's a low bar, but really it's not. Because throwing a successful feast in the Middle Ages wasn't just about providing enough meat and avoiding mouldy bread. It was about logistics, politics, etiquette, and the unspoken but very real threat that if you offended the wrong person or served them a cold stew, you might find yourself politely stabbed under the table. There's a server now moving down the line, wiping trenchers and smoothing linen napkins that weren't there earlier. He doesn't make eye contact. He just clears, folds and disappears, like a ghost in a food-stained tunic. In front of you, the dishes are fewer now, simpler. Cold salad of watercress and mustard greens drizzled in vinegar, a bowl of soft cheese, a handful of figs. It's as if the kitchen itself is exhaling after the thunderous theatrics of roast beasts and sugar castles. You get the feeling this part isn't about indulgence, it's about survival. Feasting in the medieval world was risky business. You had to seat people correctly, rank mattered. Nobles up front, servants in the back, clergy somewhere in between, unless they were high-ranking, in which case, closer to the top. And woe unto the host who sat the wrong earl next to the wrong baron. There are records of feasts ending in sword fights over seating arrangements. One bishop was once thrown out of a feast for daring to sit before the king had picked up his spoon. The hierarchy wasn't just social, it was edible. Even the order of dishes mattered. You couldn't just throw a roast swan on the table at random. There was an expected structure. First came light courses, salads, fruit, soft cheeses, then boiled meat, roasted fowl, followed by the pies and the fancy stuff. Peacocks, gilded geese, and anything on fire or stuffed with smaller animals. Sweet dishes came near the end, not quite desserts, but heavily spiced pastries, candied nuts, wine sauces with the pears. It was food as performance, and the audience was always judging. But there were deeper stakes too. Feasts were about alliances. If you fed someone well, honoured them, toasted them, and didn't accidentally poison them, you earned loyalty. Maybe even a political favour. If you did it wrong, burnt meat, poor wine, flat ale, it could sour relationships for years. A bad dinner might lead to bad treaties, or worse. You glance around the hall. Most people look blissed out, bellies swollen under embroidered tunics, eyes heavy-lidded. But a few still scan the room, watching, gauging. You wonder who's secretly counting how many times they've been offered wine, or whether their trencher was cleared at the same time as the man seated above them. There's a quiet chess game being played beneath the feast, and most guests aren't even aware of it. Meanwhile, the servers carry out the next course, something clear, wobbly, suspiciously glistening. Jelly. Not the grape kind. This is Aspic's savoury moulded jelly made from boiled animal bones and spiced stock. Inside each shimmering mould, quail eggs, slivers of chicken, herbs, and the occasional inexplicable raisin. It jiggles ominously as it lands in front of you. You prod it with a spoon and watch it tremble like it's trying to escape. Here's your quirky fact, Aspic was a culinary flex. Not because it tasted good, it didn't really, but because it proved the host had the resources to boil bones for hours, clarify stock, and mould meat into decorative shapes. It was the 14th century version of an Instagrammable meal, and just like today's gold-dusted donuts, it wasn't about flavour. It was about the signal. You take a bite. It's not bad. The texture is weird. Cold meat suspended in jelly is always going to feel a little bit like a prank, but it's savoury, sharp with vinegar and white pepper, and surprisingly refreshing after the oiliness of the fish course. You chase it with a gulp of cider and feel the combination settle in your stomach like a truce. There's a man at the far end of the table who's had too much wine. He's trying to argue with a serving girl about whether figs are aphrodisiacs, and she is clearly pretending not to hear him. A dog underneath the table snores so loudly you can feel it in your boots. Someone's emptied their bowl of aspic into a potted plant, which may or may not survive the experience. The host, a large man in a fur-lined tunic, rises unsteadily and raises his goblet. A toast, finally. He thanks the cooks, the musicians, the wine merchants. He nods toward the jelly mould. Even that, he says. People laugh. It's the most relaxed the room has felt all night. There's a scholarly debate about whether medieval etiquette was taken seriously by the guests or merely tolerated. Some argue that nobles practiced elaborate table manners to distinguish themselves from peasants. No finger-licking, no slurping, no reaching across others' plates. Others point out that feast records are full of chaos. Wine spilled on robes, dogs stealing meat, people sword-fighting over dumplings. You've now seen enough to believe both. The rules existed, sure, but whether anyone followed them depended on the hour. And the wine. You take one last sip of your cider and let the aspic do whatever strange medieval magic it's supposed to do in your stomach. Your limbs feel loose, your thoughts pleasantly woolly. A woman 2 seats down is braiding rosemary into her hair. The man who made the fish skeleton earlier has now turned to sculpting butter into the shape of a snail. Nobody stops him, and somehow through it all the host is still smiling. No one's dead, no one's insulted, everyone's fed, which, by the standards of the time, is a miracle. You fold your napkin and set it aside, noticing that others are doing the same. A quiet signal that this phase is done. The feast isn't over, not yet, but the most delicate part, the dance of hierarchy and heat and hospitality, has passed. You made it through the middle, and tomorrow you might even remember it. The kitchen doors creak open again, not with a triumphant slam this time, but with the kind of cautious confidence that says, yes, we've got more, and no, we don't care if you think it's too much. What comes out isn't grand or golden or quivering in a gelatin mould, it's comfort, chaos, and maybe just a little bit of danger. This is the part of the night when kitchens start to fight back. When food arrives slightly singed, spoons go missing, and cooks have stopped caring whether it's plated like a painting. Welcome to the Castle edition of Kitchen Nightmares. Before you even see the dish, you hear the yelling. A shrill, gravelly voice echoes from the back. "Who set the eel pie on fire again?" A crash follows. Someone mutters something about burned crust being rustic. No one argues. You'd think this would cause panic, but no. Everyone in the hall just leans in, waiting. This is not their first flaming pie. Moments later it arrives. The eel pie. Still smouldering slightly at one edge, the crust puffed and golden and wildly uneven like it's been through something. The server sets it down like it's a small victory and hurries away. You stare at it. It stares back. The smell is incredible. Smoky, peppery, sweet in places, fishy in others. You cut into it and steam erupts like the pie is exhaling. Inside, coils of eel tangled with leeks and prunes. all swimming in a creamy mustard yellow sauce. You hesitate. You're already on record enjoying fish. But this feels like a dare. You scoop a piece onto your plate and try it. And it's shockingly good. The eel is rich, almost buttery. With just enough chew, the leeks melt away. The prunes give it sweetness, depth, even the burnt crust adds crunch. A happy accident, maybe. Maybe. This is what castle kitchens were like. Big, loud, and borderline ungovernable. Multiple hearths burning at once. Dozens of staff doing different things. Some boiling, some roasting, some tripping over dogs. There were no timers, no industrial ovens, just fire, instinct, and the ever-present risk of setting your eyebrows ablaze. And when it worked, it was magic. When it didn't, well, you had burned eel pie and a lot of creative excuses. You look up and catch a glimpse into the kitchen through a narrow door left ajar. A woman, probably the head cook, is shouting without even raising her voice. Commands in short bursts. More sage. No, not that bread. Where's the jug with the good cider? She doesn't look frantic. She looks like someone who's been doing this for years, maybe decades. Her apron is stained beyond saving. Her hands never stop moving. There's a debate among historians about how many cooks staffed a medieval noble's kitchen. Some say dozens, especially during feast days. Others argue that most of the cooking was done by a core team, maybe 4 or 5, while the rest handled serving, cleaning, or panicking in the corners. What's clear is that running a kitchen of this scale was less about recipes and more about choreography. You had to know when the roast would be done, how long the bread needed, and whether the second eel pie could survive another go in the fire. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Many castle kitchens had something called a turnspit dog, a real live dog bred to run inside a wheel connected to a spit, turning the roast as it cooked. Think hamster wheel, but canine and with dinner at stake. It was exhausting work for the dog, and some kitchens gave them Sundays off. You look down at the dog sprawled beneath the table now, one of whom is snoring into a wine puddle, and wonder if any of their ancestors were roast turners. Another dish arrives, a pot of something boiling and suspiciously bubbly. Someone removes the lid with flair, and the smell hits instantly: garlic, vinegar, honey, and the sharp metallic tang of liver. This is umble pie, a stew of innards, seasoned heavily, and tucked into a crust that's half lid, half shield. It's not pretty, but you've learned better than to judge by appearances. You take a bite. The liver's tender, the sauce clings to it like armour, and the vinegar cuts through the richness like a sword. It's bold, unapologetic, and slightly alarming. You love it. These pies weren't designed for show, they were practical. Offal didn't go to waste, nothing did. The castle cook had to use everything: lungs, kidneys, brains, feet. What couldn't be fried got boiled, what couldn't be boiled got baked, and what couldn't be baked got fed to the hounds or hidden under enough pastry to seem like food. You glance down the table and see varying reactions. Some people nibble politely, others dig in like it's the only dish they've enjoyed all night. A boy about 10 years old is holding a piece of liver with 2 fingers like it's about to fight him. The liver might win. Now here comes the fringe observation. Medieval kitchens didn't smell like today's. Not just herbs and meat, but wet stone, open flame, sour ale, raw dough, and smoke, so much smoke. You'd carry it on your clothes, in your hair, in your skin. If you were a castle cook, you smelled like a castle. Not perfume, not soap, roast boar and garlic and ash. You sip from a mug that may or may not be your original one. Hard to say at this point. It tastes like something new, maybe mulled ale with egg yolk. It's thick, spicy, and oddly comforting. A liquid custard that happens to buzz. Your vision softens at the edges. There's one more course from the kitchen. Roast turnips glazed in honey and vinegar. Simple, beautiful, and slightly charred. Probably by accident, probably not regretted. The sweetness sings. You chase it with a piece of barley bread and realise you're full again. Not just in the stomach, but in the senses. The kind of full that makes your shoulders drop and your eyelids hover like they're on strike. The cooks have quieted. You can hear laughter now from the kitchen, soft, real. They have made it through the hardest part. The fire is lower, the smoke thinner. The worst crises, exploding pastry, forgotten sauces, burned crusts, have passed. You look at your half-eaten eel pie, at the smear of umble stew on your trencher, at the butter snail now squished into modern art, and you smile. Dinner has stopped being about perfection. It's become something else entirely. You're almost asleep, head tipping forward, fingers still curled loosely around your mug, when someone sets down a new platter with a dull thud. You jolt upright, just in time to see what looks like a small pastry mountain being placed at the centre of the table. The crust is golden, dusted with flour, slightly cracked, and smells like hot meat, sweet onions, and something vaguely metallic. A slice has already been carved out of the side, revealing layers: meat, herbs, soft-boiled eggs, and, wait, feathers? No, not actual feathers. Just the remnants of a pie so ambitious it once held an entire bird, plumage and all, for decoration. What you're staring at now is pigeon pie. Real medieval style, not the polite puff pastry appetizers of modern canapes. This is the full no apologies version. Rustic, thick, and loaded with enough protein to power a cathedral. You pick up your spoon, or knife, or maybe just your fingers at this point, and scoop out a generous wedge. Inside you find tender pigeon meat, still pink at the bone, swimming in a gravy thickened with breadcrumbs, spiked with wine, and spiced with mace and pepper. There's a hard-boiled egg tucked into one corner of the crust like a little edible surprise, and a sliver of smoked ham folded beside it. It's rich, it's savoury, it's slightly confusing in the best way. The crust isn't flaky, it's structural. You bite it and realise this pie was never meant to be dainty. It's medieval Tupperware. A coffin crust, they called it, baked hard and thick to keep the food sealed inside. It doubled as a container and a preservation tool. In theory, you didn't even have to eat the crust. But you do, and it's good, chewy, infused with meat juices, and still warm from the hearth. It tastes like the end of the world would be fine as long as you had this and a jug of cider. You glance down the table and see variations of the same pie, some smaller, some more elaborate. One has a crust moulded into the shape of a pigeon, beak and all. Another has small slits cut in the top where steam puffs out like little sighs. These aren't just meals, they're edible traditions. Here's your historical fact. Pies in the Middle Ages weren't limited to dessert, far from it. Savoury pies were more common, often stuffed with anything from beef to lamprey to entire roasted birds. The crust was often several inches thick, designed to be baked days ahead and then reheated, or not depending on how much wine had already been consumed. Pies were storage, luxury, and spectacle all at once. You take another bite. There's a hint of fruit, raisins, maybe currants sneaking in beneath the meat. Sweet and savoury in one. That wasn't a mistake. Medieval people loved mixing flavours, meat with fruit, fish with sugar, eggs with cinnamon. The flavour profiles weren't cleanly divided like they are now. Dinner could be sweet, dessert could be salty, and no one blinked. A man 2 seats away is arguing half-heartedly with someone about whether it's better to bury the egg in the bottom of the pie or let it sit near the top like a little treasure. Someone else suggests layering multiple birds in a single pie, chicken, inside a duck, inside a goose, the infamous turducken's ancient grandparent. You believe them. You've already seen enough tonight to accept that anything is possible if you have enough flour and zero shame. You sip your cider, still cool, still sharp, and let the crust soak up the gravy on your plate. The pie is heavy, yes, but also comforting. You're full, of course, but not too full. Not yet. This is the kind of food that gives you an excuse to stay just a little longer, to keep picking at the corner of the crust like there might be one last bite hiding inside. A woman nearby wipes her hands on her apron and recounts how pies like this were used to impress visiting nobles. The size, the filling, the decoration, all coded signals of wealth and hospitality. In one tale, a pie was presented at a wedding feast with live doves inside. They flew out when it was cut open, and everyone gasped, and no one really ate the pie. But it didn't matter. It had served its purpose, spectacle over sustenance. There's a scholarly debate about how widespread these pie traditions really were. Some say most were regional, limited to noble courts or special events. Others argue that variations of meat pies existed in every village, just simpler, less adorned. Your opinion? It doesn't matter. This pie tastes like memory, like something that's been cooked 1,000 times by hands older than history. Here's a fringe fact. In some regions, pie crusts were stamped with household symbols, little crests or initials pressed into the dough before baking. It helped identify the maker, especially when several families used the communal oven. Think of it as early food branding, except edible and more personal. You like that idea. Food but with a signature. Back at your plate, the crust is crumbling gently under your fingers. You scoop up the last bite of pigeon, swipe it through the gravy, and close your eyes. It's dark, meaty, a little earthy. You imagine it being caught just this morning, plucked, gutted, stewed with cohoes, pulled from the yard, wrapped in dough, baked for hours. A simple process, a complicated flavour. You're suddenly very aware of how disconnected modern meals can feel. The harpist plays a slower tune now, one string twanging slightly off-key. It adds to the comfort. A lullaby for gluttons. Someone yawns, another stretches. There are fewer platters now, more empty goblets than full ones. The conversation drifts like smoke, low, meandering, without urgency. The man who carved the pigeon mould pie has fallen asleep face down on the table, his crust masterpiece crushed beneath his cheek. No one wakes him. A server quietly removes his plate, replaces it with a clean one, and drapes a napkin over his shoulder like a blanket. Kindness disguised as etiquette. You sit back, your hands buttery, your fingers dusted with flour. There's a softness to the room now, the kind that only happens when everyone is full, not just of food but of stories, laughter, and the quiet understanding that tonight meant something. The pie is gone, but you'll remember it. The air in the hall has changed again, no longer just heavy with the scent of roasting meat or bubbling stews, but something sharper, more complex. You sniff, pause, and try to name it. Sweet? Yes, but not candy sweet. There's heat, citrus, spice, maybe something floral. You squint toward the far end of the room where the kitchen staff are setting down fresh platters, each dish smelling like it came from a different continent. Because, well, it kind of did. You've hit the point in the feast where the world is suddenly on your plate. Not metaphorically, literally. The scents and flavours you're about to experience are the result of trade routes that spanned thousands of miles. Empires that rose and fell, and merchant ships that risked storms and pirates to deliver precious little sacks of powder and pod and root. Medieval Europe didn't invent global cuisine, but they definitely started importing it. The first dish arrives with no explanation. A pile of rice, something like rice, cooked until soft, tinted yellow with saffron, studded with raisins, and perfumed with cinnamon and cardamom. It smells like a palace in a dream. You take a bite. It's savoury, sweet, warm, and rich in a way that feels impossibly modern. Like rice pudding and biryani had an extremely civilised baby. You close your eyes. You don't care if it's historically accurate. It's delicious. Across the table, someone tears into a spiced lamb pastry with a crust tinted red from ground sumac. Another dips a hard-boiled egg into a sauce so yellow it glows. Probably turmeric, though no one uses that word here. They call it Indian root, or golden dust. These are the spoils of the spice trade, the edible trophies of contact with faraway lands. Every dish tonight feels like a love letter to a place the cook has never seen but knows through its flavour. Here's your historical fact. Medieval Europe was obsessed with spices. Like, obsessed. Black pepper, cloves, nutmeg, mace, cinnamon, galangal, these were worth their weight in gold, quite literally. Wars were fought over them, fortunes were made, a single shipload of pepper could elevate a merchant to nobility. Kings tracked their spice inventories like modern collectors track NFTs. It wasn't just taste, it was power. What's ironic is that people often assume medieval food was bland. The truth? It was sometimes too flavourful by today's standards. Dishes were spiced heavily, sometimes to the point of seeming disorienting, even chaotic. The idea of balance was different then. They didn't want subtlety, they wanted impact. Food was drama. If your tongue didn't tingle a little, and your sweat smell like cloves by the end of dinner, what was even the point? You're offered a small bowl of something they call sambakeitap, or a custard flavoured with elderflower, sweetened with honey, and dusted with grated long pepper. It's like dessert and medicine got together and created a spa experience for your mouth. The elderflower is delicate, the honey earthy. The pepper burns slightly in the back of your throat. You smile. No one else seems fazed. They've been living this way for centuries. There's debate among scholars about whether all these exotic spices were truly common, or if they only reached the richest tables. Some say even peasants use small amounts for special occasions. Others argue that the average person never touched saffron or cloves unless they were preparing food for someone with a coat of arms and a personal chapel. Still, evidence from kitchen waste and tax records suggests a surprising amount of pepper in places you wouldn't expect. The world, it turns out, was a lot more connected than your 7th grade history textbook led you to believe. Here's your quirky fact. Nutmeg, which now sits politely on top of your latte, was once believed to cure the plague. People wore it around their necks, carried it in pouches, ground it into wine, mixed it with vinegar. If you had nutmeg, you weren't just fancy, you were protected, allegedly. And if you accidentally took too much, you hallucinated. Nutmeg. The medieval superfood and party drug. Back on your trencher, someone has dropped a piece of grilled chicken, marinated a day in a mixture of vinegar, coriander, and what might be ground ginger. You take a bite and taste fire. Not literal heat, but that warm, spicy shimmer that lingers behind your eyes. It's complex, layered. You keep chewing because you want to understand it better. You never do, but that's part of the charm. The cook appears for a moment. A tall man with flour in his beard and saffron on his cuffs. He accepts a goblet of wine but doesn't drink it. Just sniffs it, nods, and vanishes again. He's the alchemist behind all this flavour, and you suspect he enjoys the mystery of it. There's no recipe book, just instinct, memory, and whatever strange little packet arrived with the last merchant caravan. Across the hall, a group of musicians has shifted to something new. Not quite a melody, more like a rhythm, a beat that mimics the pacing of a merchant caravan crossing distant hills. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. Either way, the music matches the food. You chew in time with the beat, as if your palate has joined the rhythm section. And now, the strangest dish of the night. Something that looks like candied orange peel, stuffed with a paste of pine nuts and rosewater. You bite into it and blink. It's floral, nutty, slightly bitter, and unreasonably good. This is the kind of thing modern chefs would charge you $25 for and call deconstructed. Here, it's just Tuesday. A woman across the table leans over and whispers, "Do you know what's in this?" You shrug as she grins. "Neither do I, but I want more." And that's the joy of it. The mystery. The chance to taste something you can't quite name but will remember for days. The fusion of places and people you'll never meet, all rendered into flavour. As the course winds down, you realise your tongue is tingling, not from heat but from complexity. Your nose tingles too. Maybe the pepper, maybe the wine. You feel awake in a new way, bright-eyed, humming with the history you've just eaten. You lean back, stretch your fingers, take another sip of wine laced with something citrusy and bitter. Maybe bitter orange peel, maybe medicine. Who knows? What you do know is that you've tasted the world tonight, and you didn't even have to leave the table. The fire has burned low again, down to soft, pulsing embers that glow like sleeping coals in a dragon's belly. Around the hall, the energy has mellowed into a kind of dreamy stillness, the after dinner phase where no one dares stand up and conversation turns soft and circular. That's when the next dish arrives, subtle and strange, not grand or steaming but gently aromatic, like something brewed in a wizard's hut rather than a kitchen. It's a stew, sort of. A small bowl filled with a pale, creamy liquid speckled with petals, and something that smells like warm bark. You pick it up and tilt it toward your nose. Lavender, fennel, little nutmeg. There's a rooty depth to it too, and just a trace of sweet vinegar. You take a cautious sip, and it tastes like calm, earthy, soft, slightly sweet, with a floral whisper and a surprising peppery finish. It lingers, not like a meal, but like a memory. Melancholy broth, someone says beside you, as if that explains everything. And in fact, it sort of does. You've reached the part of the feast where food becomes medicine, not just physically, though certainly that too, but emotionally, spiritually, and, depending on who you ask, cosmically. This is a dish not meant to fill your stomach, but to quiet your soul. The cooks haven't made this for applause. They've made it because someone, somewhere in the dining hall, might be sad and not even know why. In the medieval worldview, emotions were tied to the body through the 4 humours: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Imbalances in these fluids, they believed, caused everything from headaches to heartbreak. Too much black bile? You were melancholic. Too much yellow bile? Angry. The solution? Balance through food. And not just any food. Stews like this one, simmered with herbs known to cool the passions and settle the mind, were prescribed for poets, priests, and anyone who spent too long staring at the stars. You sip again. It's doing something, but you're not sure what. The sharpness of the vinegar seems to lift the fog behind your eyes. The fennel clears your sinuses. The lavender, well, the lavender just hugs you from the inside. Next to you, a monk leans in and says, "That one has betony in it. Good for nightmares and sorrow." He nods, then goes back to chewing a candied root like it's a piece of licorice. You're not sure if he's joking. Betony was a real thing, an herb grown in monastery gardens, used for everything from toothaches to melancholy. It was believed to ward off evil dreams and restore clarity of thought. You decide to believe it. You feel lighter already. Here's your historical fact. Medieval medical manuals often included recipes that blurred the line between food and remedy. Broths infused with herbs, wine spiced with cinnamon and cloves to stimulate the liver. Pastes made from almond milk and breadcrumbs to calm an upset stomach. And often these dishes were as much about ritual as effect. It wasn't just what you ate, it was when, how, and with what intention. You try the accompanying bread, dense, seeded, and spread with a thin layer of something tangy and herbal. Maybe goat cheese with thyme, maybe a plant you've never heard of. It's cold, savoury, grounding. You chew slowly, deliberately, like the act of eating itself is part of the cure. And now for your quirky fact. Nutmeg, now considered a cosy spice for holiday baking, was once so valuable and so powerful in belief that people used it not only in food but as a drug. Not recreationally, at least not on purpose, but as a mood lifter. Too much of it could induce hallucinations, nausea, and even euphoria. Some monks warned against overuse, fearing it would heat the blood and make the soul restless. You glance down at the floating flecks in your broth. Better not finish the whole thing too fast. A new bowl appears. It's filled with poached pears soaked in wine and infused with something fragrant. Rosewater, cinnamon, and yes, more nutmeg. They shimmer in the dim firelight, sliced just enough to fall open like petals. You spear a piece with your spoon. It's soft but not mushy, delicate but deeply flavoured, sweet with a touch of bitterness. You chew slowly, and the flavours seem to drift up behind your eyes, like steam in reverse. This is food made to sedate, not in a harsh pharmaceutical way, but like a lullaby, like something your grandmother would make if your grandmother was also an alchemist. It's comforting without being dull, indulgent without being heavy. You don't feel sleepy exactly, but your thoughts have started to round off at the corners. You're drifting not away, just sideways. There's a quiet debate at the far end of the table about whether dishes like this actually worked, or whether they were just the medieval version of placebo. One man argues the herbs had real effects, cooling the body, calming the nerves. Another insists it was the ritual, the ceremony of being fed something with intention. The truth, as usual, probably lives somewhere in between. You feel better. Whether it's the broth or the idea of the broth doesn't really matter. Another plate lands in front of you, this time a small pastry filled with crushed poppy seeds, honey and mint. You take a bite, and the bitterness of the seeds is immediately softened by the honey. The mint lingers on your breath, sharp and cool like a whisper across your teeth. You swallow and feel like you've just taken a breath you didn't know you were holding. Here's something fringe. Medieval doctors once recommended mint to strengthen the brain and stir up the heart, which sounds dramatic, but after a bite of this you get it. Your heart isn't exactly stirred, but it's definitely relaxed. You look around the hall. The laughter has softened into murmurs. People aren't eating as much as they are nibbling. A fig here, a spoon of broth there. Even the musicians have switched to something slower, lute and flute meandering and melancholic. The torches flicker like they're on the edge of going out. You rub your eyes, and for a moment everything blurs into candlelight and spice. You breathe deeply. The scent of nutmeg, lavender, and slow-cooked pears hangs in the air like a gentle fog. You don't feel full anymore, not in the heavy belt-loosening way. You feel settled. And that might be the greatest magic of this feast. Not just its ability to nourish, but to soothe, to offer a moment of stillness in a world that was always noisy, hungry, chaotic. In a time before therapy or sleeping pills, this was how people calmed their bodies and quieted their minds. You cradle your bowl nearly empty and smile. Tonight the medicine tasted better than the illness. A new hush falls over the hall, the kind that doesn't announce itself but arrives slowly, like dusk settling over the countryside. No one says, "Be quiet," and yet they are. Conversations fade, forks and knives clatter less. Even the dogs have gone still, curled in warm, puddled circles by the hearth. And then, as if summoned by the silence itself, the doors creak open, and in comes a procession. Not grand, not loud, but heavy, measured. In their hands are platters, on the platters are skulls. Okay, miniature skulls, made of sugar or almond paste, maybe both. They're not real, but they're not exactly whimsical either. Each one is dusted with spices, clove, cinnamon, maybe a little black pepper, giving them an eerie, sweet scent that drifts through the hall like a whisper from the other side. A boy sets one carefully before you. He doesn't speak, just nods and walks on. And just like that, you realise this is a feast for the dead. You glance around. No one looks surprised. Some people close their eyes, others nod solemnly, touch their goblets to their lips but don't drink. This isn't the funeral of a person, it's a ritual, a moment carved out of the feast for remembrance. In medieval life, the dead weren't far away. They didn't float off to some distant cloud, they stayed close, woven into the fabric of daily life, remembered not in silence but in song, story and supper. Here's your historical fact. Medieval people routinely held commemorative feasts for the dead, especially on All Souls' Day or during funerals. The food served wasn't just about feeding the mourners, it was meant to nourish the departed on their journey through the afterlife. Dishes were chosen for their symbolism, bread for the body, wine for the soul, and sweets, especially moulded ones like these sugar skulls, for remembrance. You pick yours up. It's heavier than you expect. The scent is intoxicating, sweet and spicy, dark and floral. You bite it. The outside crunches like brittle candy, but inside is soft, dense marzipan. Almond, honey, rosewater, and just a pinch of black pepper. It melts slowly on your tongue, strange and lovely, like something that shouldn't exist but somehow does. Music begins again, but not the cheerful strums and piping flutes from earlier. This is different. A lone lute, a voice, low, mournful, barely singing. It's a ballad, you realise, a song for someone lost. The lyrics float past you, half heard like incense. Something about a woman who waited by a window for a husband who never came home. Or maybe he did, but not the way he left. Another dish arrives, stewed dried fruits. Plums, cherries, dates. Dark and syrupy, nearly black in their bowl. You take a spoonful. It's rich, almost winey, cooked with cinnamon and nutmeg, maybe steeped in a bit of actual wine. There's a warmth to it, a gravity, like a dessert wearing mourning clothes. You ask the man beside you, soft-spoken, grey-bearded, why this dish feels so heavy. He replies, because every dried fruit was once ripe. He smiles. It's food that remembers. You want to argue, but you don't. You just take another bite. There's scholarly debate about whether medieval remembrance meals were truly sombre or more celebratory in nature. Some records suggest a quiet reverence. Simple food, prayers, maybe a chant. Others describe full-blown feasts, complete with music, laughter, even games, as if the dead were invited to sit and eat, not mourned from a distance. You suspect it was both. Joy and sorrow weren't separate here. They shared a plate. Here's your quirky fact. In parts of medieval Europe, people left out food on graves. Loaves of bread, cups of ale, small cakes. Not just symbolic offerings, but actual sustenance, meant to be consumed by the spirits, or more likely passed on to the poor in the name of the departed. In a sense, everyone ate together. The living, the dead, and the hungry. A strange circular generosity. Another tray circles the room, this one holding bone-shaped biscuits, spiced, pale, glazed with a thin sugar syrup that glistens like candlelight. You pick one up, it crumbles gently in your hand, you eat it slowly, each bite a soft echo. It's not dramatic, not indulgent, it's simple, just enough sweetness to leave a memory on your tongue. Now comes the wine, not red this time, but dark purple, steeped with mulberries and violets. It tastes like dusk in liquid form. You drink slowly. It warms your throat but chills your fingers. A strange contrast. Not unpleasant. You feel oddly awake. The music shifts again. Still soft, but lighter now. A touch of hope in the melody. A flicker of something rising. You look around the room and notice small gestures. A woman holding a handkerchief that's been stitched with a name. A man touching the rim of his goblet to the table 3 times before drinking. Another standing silently, eyes closed, mouthing a name you'll never know. The servers move gently, clearing the plates with care. Not rushed, not mechanical, like they're handling relics. And maybe they are. You think about your own ghosts, not the scary ones, the quiet ones. People you miss without meaning to. The ones whose voices drift into your mind at odd hours. You wonder what they'd want to eat tonight, what dish would bring them back even for a moment. You touch your spoon to the last of the fruit compote and wonder how many centuries have ended this way. With a room full of full bellies and heavy hearts, with songs about longing and sweets shaped like bones. You're not sad, not exactly, just quiet. The skull sits in front of you, now only half-eaten, a jagged smile still intact. You reach forward and break off the rest of its jaw. Chew slowly, let the memory dissolve on your tongue. You're not sure when it happens, somewhere between the bittersweet fruit and the bone-shaped biscuits, maybe after the second cup of violet wine, but the warmth of the fire begins to feel different. Less like heat and more like gravity, like it's gently pulling you down into your seat, into your limbs, into yourself. The music has faded into something even slower than. Before, a soft plucking that might just be someone absent-mindedly tuning a stringed instrument near the hearth. Everything feels slower now, quieter. Even your heartbeat has decided to take a more medieval pace. And just as your eyelids begin to slide downward, you catch a flicker of movement by the fire. Something turning. You lean forward, just slightly, and there it is, the great iron spit. Still rotating, still dripping, still whispering secrets in the language of sizzling fat. You'd almost forgotten about it. That giant roast, whatever it was, has been spinning for what feels like days, golden and gleaming. The boy turning it has been replaced. Now a sturdier teen who looks like he hasn't spoken in years and doesn't plan to start tonight. His face is half-shadowed by firelight, eyes fixed on the slow, eternal rotation. It's mesmerizing. A cook, apron torn, sleeves rolled high, arms dusted with ash, appears with a wooden ladle and a bundle of herbs tied into a brush. She dips it into a bowl of butter, wine, and crushed garlic, then dabs it over the roast with the focus of someone painting a masterpiece. You can smell it from your seat. The heat hits your face. Your stomach, which you thought had officially clocked out, suddenly whimpers. You're not hungry exactly, you're possessed. A platter lands in front of you. It's a slice of meat, dark and crisp at the edges, glistening in places, barely resisting the knife as you cut into it. It's roasted on the bone, but the marrow's been scooped out and replaced with something fragrant. Parsley, lemon peel, breadcrumbs, maybe even crushed almonds. You take a bite. The skin is smoky and brittle, cracking under your teeth like glass. The meat, tender enough to shame silk. The flavour is rich, earthy, and tangled with garlic, rosemary, and the faintest hit of fire. This is rotisserie in its oldest, rawest form. Nothing electric, nothing automatic, just heat, movement, and time. Lots of time. Roasting on the spit was a full-body commitment. Someone had to turn it, watch it, baste it, monitor the fire, the fat, the balance of meat and flame, and that someone probably started at dawn. Here's your historical fact. Spit roasting was one of the most respected cooking techniques in medieval kitchens, especially in noble households. It was considered both an art and a test of endurance. Turn spits, where the boys, servants, or dogs in wheels could spend hours doing nothing but rotating meat, making sure it cooked evenly, absorbed every drop of marinade, and never dried out. It wasn't glamorous, but the result? Unmatched. You chew slowly, every bite tasting more like a reward than a meal. This isn't just dinner, it's a culmination. The kind of food that says, we waited all day for this and now, finally it's here. Across the table, someone groans, not from pain but from pleasure. Another person leans back, eyes closed, chewing like they're composing poetry in their head. A woman beside you dips her meat in a thick sauce of vinegar, honey, and crushed walnuts, then hums quietly to herself. No one speaks much. They're too busy thanking the universe with their molars. And here's your quirky fact. In some medieval feast traditions, the final roasted meat of the night was seen as the soul of the meal. It was the anchor, the bow on the package, the food that lingered the longest in your memory, your teeth, and possibly your dreams. Some households even carved symbols into the roast or decorated it with herbs that carried specific meanings. Parsley for courage, thyme for remembrance, bay leaves for protection. You glance down. There's a bay leaf on your plate. It sticks to the gravy like a secret. There's a lull in the room now, a collective exhale. The energy isn't gone. It's just quieter. Like a theatre after the curtain drops, but before the lights rise, everyone's leaning into the moment, chewing slowly, drinking thoughtfully. The food has stopped being about abundance. It's become about presence. You look up toward the spit again, still turning, but now with nothing on it. Just the last shimmering trails of fat hissing into the coals. The fire hisses in reply, like it's disappointed there's nothing left to cook. And just as you're about to sit back and surrender to the inevitable food coma, someone appears with a bowl of marrow bones, split lengthwise, roasted until the fat inside is quivering and golden. You scoop some out with a spoon, spread it on toast and bite down. It's absurd, like eating a cloud made of beef. Rich, silky, slightly nutty, with a savoury depth that sinks into your chest like a blanket made of flavour. This was the hidden jewel of the rotisserie roast. The part saved for last, for those patient enough to remain at the table, or lucky enough to still be awake. You are both, barely. A server offers you a mug of something dark and thick, maybe wine, maybe broth. You accept it without question. It's warm, slightly salty, and tastes like everything you've eaten so far is melted down into a single drinkable memory. It's not meant to excite you. It's meant to end things softly. There's no applause, no grand finale. Just slow chewing, quiet fire, and the gentle scrape of knives against wooden plates. Somewhere, someone burps with great dignity. You feel it in your soul. You lean back once more, the rotisserie flavours still swirling through your mouth like smoke in a sealed room. The embers glow, the air cools, your body sinks deeper into the bench, and for a moment you think, I could fall asleep right here in this roasted meat dreamscape and die content. But there's still dessert coming. Of course there is. You honestly don't know how you're still upright. Your body is starting to function on whatever magical combination of medieval meat sweats, honeyed rain and ironing, and sheer willpower is keeping everyone else seated. Around the hall, people are slouched like decorative pillows, too full to move but too curious to leave. The fire has gone from roaring inferno to quiet glow. The spit has stopped spinning, and just when you think the feast might be tapering to its final chapter, a low whistle echoes through the room. It starts at the kitchen door and winds its way in like a spell. Enter dessert. Not the dainty, perfectly plated kind you know. No abstract swirls, no sprigs of mint placed at a 45-degree angle. No, this dessert is ambitious, indulgent, and faintly threatening. The kind of sweet that was once whispered about in taverns, with warnings and awe. The kind of sweet you survive, not just taste. The first dish arrives looking innocent enough. A stack of honey cakes, layered with the crushed nuts and dried figs, soaked all in a syrup so thick it gleams like amber in the firelight. You take one, it sticks to your fingers immediately. There is no graceful way to eat it. You bite, and it oozes. The cake is dense and spongy, more bread than fluff, and the honey hits like a punch. It's not cloying, it's potent, raw. You imagine the bees that made this honey were raised on spite and wildfire. You chew slowly, feeling your pulse respond to the sugar in real time. The figs add a chewiness that drags out every bite, and the nuts, hazelnuts or maybe ground almonds, add crunch, depth, a savoury hum beneath the syrup. It's not delicate, it's not restrained, it's glorious chaos. And here's your historical fact. Honey was the primary sweetener in medieval Europe. Sugar was known, yes, but rare, expensive, and often imported in solid cones called loaves, which had to be chipped away with special tools. Honey, on the other hand, was local, abundant, and used in everything from medicine to marinades to, apparently, cakes so sweet they might be classified as weaponry. A second plate arrives. These are smaller, paler, little custards baked into pastry shells, flavoured with saffron and rosewater. You take one and bite. It's cold, silky, rich, eggy in the most comforting way, with just enough floral edge to feel fancy. It's like eating a medieval sunrise. And now, the fringe detail. There's evidence that in some courts, people intentionally pushed dessert into dangerous territory. As in, let's see how much nutmeg we can consume before things get weird. Nutmeg was believed to stimulate the body and mind. Cinnamon was considered a warming spice, good for digestion and passion. Cardamom, exotic and mysterious. Medieval desserts weren't just sweets, they were performance-enhancing experiences. A man across from you lifts his spoon and says, "If you eat 3 of these, you'll see angels." He doesn't blink. You make a mental note to stop at 2. More platters land on the table, each one an edible dare. Candied almonds rolled in crushed anise, pears poached in red wine, then stuffed with dried dates and sealed with marzipan. A kind of jelly made from boiled quince, cooled and sliced into jewel-toned squares. There's even a sticky paste of crushed pine nuts and honey formed into little towers, topped with what looks like edible gold leaf, or maybe just very enthusiastic glitter. You hesitate before picking it up. It jiggles slightly. You take a bite. It's rich, nutty, oddly refreshing, and also just confusing. You love it, but you don't know why. This is the moment when your tongue gives up and just rides the wave. There's a scholarly debate over how much dessert the average medieval person actually enjoyed. Some say these elaborate confections were reserved for the ultra-wealthy. Others argue that even peasants made simple sweet dishes. Cheese curds with honey, dried fruits, spiced puddings, whenever they could afford to. What's certain is that dessert wasn't about ending the meal with a delicate note. It was about sealing the memory of the feast into your senses. Here comes your quirky fact. In some banquets, hosts would present illusion foods as part of dessert. A cake shaped like a castle, filled with custard, a roast shaped like a fruit, marzipan moulded into birds, dragons, and little human heads. You'd bite into what looked like a pear, and discover it was almond paste mixed with crushed herbs. It wasn't just a prank. It was culinary theatre. You try one such item now, a little round ball clearly meant to look like an apple. You expect fruit, you get cheese, but it's smooth, spiced, just barely sweet. A strange hybrid that shouldn't work but somehow does. You eat the whole thing. The wine comes back, this time sweetened and spiced, served warm in little silver cups. Tastes like mulled cider and roasted fruit. You sip, feeling it cut through the richness coating your tongue. It's a reset button for your palate. You immediately drink more than you should. A hush settles over the room again. Not reverent, just deeply satisfied. You look around and see the same expression on every face, a sort of dazed, sugar-coated serenity. Someone sighs audibly. A man at the end of the table drops his spoon into a custard bowl, leans back and mutters, "I can taste colours." You get it. Your fingers are sticky, your teeth are buzzing, your head is pleasantly heavy, and still you're not quite done. A server places one last item in front of you. A single preserved date, sliced open and stuffed with almond paste dusted with powdered sugar and topped with a tiny candied rose petal. You pop it into your mouth. It's soft, sweet, brief. A final note. Not a bang, not a crescendo, just the quiet closing of the curtain. You lean back in your seat. Your breath is warm, your blood is sugared. Your senses are tingling in ways they haven't in hours. You survived medieval dessert? Barely. You're floating now. Not metaphorically, well, yes, metaphorically, but also spiritually, possibly emotionally, definitely digestively. Your body has crossed that sacred post-dessert threshold where it no longer knows what to do with itself. Your stomach's full, your tongue has had a full shift and wants union representation. Your brain is swaying like it's on a boat that hasn't docked yet. And just when you think the culinary onslaught has ended, when all that's left is digesting, sighing, and slipping into food-induced oblivion, someone places a bowl in front of you with a smell so potent it knocks you right back to attention. Garlic, raw, roasted, mashed, floating in oil. It's in the air. It's in your nose, it's possibly already in your bloodstream. And next to it, a small modest bowl of stewed onions, caramelized to a near black gloss, tangled with herbs and swimming in some kind of glistening brown syrup. There's bread beside it, thick, dark, and already sweating from the proximity to that much aromatic intensity. This is no accident. This is not a light finish. This is the medieval mic drop. You take a bite. The onion melts immediately, sweet and sticky, but with a sharp edge that sneaks up on the back of your tongue. Then the garlic hits, roasted to the point of collapse, smeared across the bread like butter, then sprinkled with coarse salt and something bitter, maybe crushed lovage or mustard seed. It's rich, it's powerful, and it's aggressively antisocial. Someone next to you coughs mid-bite. Another fanatically dips a piece of bread into the garlicky oil and moans, "I'm going to smell like this for a week." The woman across from you nods solemnly and mutters, "Let it be my legacy." Here's your historical fact. Garlic and onions were essential ingredients in medieval cooking, especially for the lower classes. But they weren't looked down on. Quite the opposite. They were prized for their flavour, their medicinal qualities, and, in some regions, their sheer staying power. Garlic was believed to warm the blood, drive out evil humours, and protect against disease, especially the kind of diseases that travelled on rats and bad air. And it wasn't just folklore. Garlic and onions contain natural antibacterial compounds. People didn't know the science, but they knew the effect. When the plague came knocking, you wanted a necklace of garlic and a strong nose. You swipe another chunk of bread through the oil and take a bite. It's sharp but not harsh. The roasted garlic is smooth, velvety, with that caramelised sweetness that lingers. The raw garlic, on the other hand, is a punch to the mouth. There's vinegar in there too, bright, sour cutting. Your sinuses clear instantly. You might have been briefly reborn. Now for the quirky fact, garlic and onions weren't just flavour agents. They were full-on characters in medieval folklore. Garlic was hung above doors to ward off spirits. Onions were considered good luck charms. People would place them under pillows to absorb illness, carry them in pouches to repel curses, and in at least one recorded case attempt to divine marriage prospects by the sprouting patterns of a particularly large leek. You look at your bowl of onion stew with new respect. This isn't just food, it's an aromatic spell. There's a plate of leek fritters making the rounds now, thin slices dipped in a batter of flour and ale, fried in animal fat until crisp at the edges. They smell intense. You grab one. It's crunchy, greasy, and somehow both comforting and slightly evil. It tastes like the late-night snack your ancestors would have made to keep warm and stay awake while hiding from ghosts or debating astrology. The topic at the table is shifted accordingly. No more songs or stories. Now, people are comparing garlic tolerance like it's a competitive sport. A man with sweat on his brow proudly proclaims he once ate a bulb raw before a duel. Another swears he mixes minced onions into his morning ale for clarity. No one questions this. You begin to suspect these aren't exaggerations. A scholarly debate floats up, quiet but fierce, about whether the heavy use of alliums was a matter of necessity or preference. Some claim garlic and onions masked the taste of old or spoiled meat. Others argue they were used because they were easy to grow and packed more flavour than anything else affordable. But plenty of records suggest that even in higher kitchens, these pungent ingredients were celebrated. Even royal recipes include leeks, shallots, scallions, and great heaping amounts of garlic. You sip a mug of something thick and cloudy, probably another round of small ale, just to help process the bust radius in your mouth. It doesn't work. Your taste buds are still reeling, and yet you reach for more, because despite the intensity, there's something undeniably satisfying about this part of the meal. No frills, no pageantry, no roast peacock or glitter-dusted desserts, just fire, fat and flavour. The kind of food you eat with your sleeves rolled up and your regrets postponed until morning. You dip a piece of leek into the onion stew. It's absurd, overkill, but you're in too deep now. You chew, blink hard and accept that you might never taste anything the same again. A few guests begin to rise from the table, not dramatically, but in the way people do when their souls have re-entered their bodies after a long journey. Someone belts out a garlic-laced burp that echoes off the stone wall like a medieval foghorn. No one even flinches. You sit back, licking oil from your fingers, your mouth pleasantly scorched, your breath now capable of warding off vampires for a 3-county radius. There's nothing elegant left in this course, and that's exactly why it works. The garlic and onions haven't just fed you, they've stripped everything else away. No illusions, no gold leaf, just raw roasted truth. You exhale. The fire crackles. Somewhere someone begins to laugh for no clear reason. A dog barks and then immediately regrets it. You swirl the last bit of oil in your bowl and decide not to finish it. Not because you couldn't, but because it's nice to leave just one bite uneaten. A symbol, a warning, a tribute. You lean back, close your eyes, and begin to sweat. At some point in the late hours of the feast, long after the garlic has settled into your pores and the honey cakes have hardened into edible bricks of memory, someone stumbles into the centre of the hall holding a clay bowl filled with, well, let's call it a questionable stew. The smell is intense. It's spiced, yes, but there's also a sourness, a smoky edge, and something unidentifiably earthy that makes your spine twitch. Everyone leans forward. A few people wrinkle their noses. A brave soul dips a spoon into the bowl and takes a bite. Their expression goes from suspicion to surprise to, I need more of that immediately. You sit up straighter. This is Crusader food. More specifically, the kind of food that started showing up in European kitchens after your soldiers returned from the Holy Land. They didn't just bring back scars and stories. They brought ingredients, techniques, spices, sauces, and with them an entirely new approach to cooking, one influenced by Arabic cuisine, North African heat, and the ingenious layering of sweet and savoury that would forever change how Europe ate. The stew in question turns out to be a kind of sour meat dish, made with vinegar, prunes, cinnamon, and, if the hushed guesses are right, a few spoonfuls of date molasses. It's rich but not heavy, tart but not unpleasant, and full of flavours that weren't grown anywhere near here. You take a bite, then a second. The meat is melted into the sauce, and the sauce clings to your tongue like a good secret. You glance around and realise that half the dishes now making their way around the room have something imported going on. A lentil porridge cooked with coriander, a thick sauce made with tamarind and wine. Even the bread has changed. Flatbreads with za'atar-like sprinkles, rich with sesame and dried herbs. The influence of the Crusades wasn't just military, it was culinary. Here's your historical fact. During the Crusades, roughly 11th to 13th century, European crusaders encountered sophisticated Islamic food cultures. In cities like Antioch, Jerusalem and Damascus, they discovered ingredients and recipes that were miles ahead of their own. Kitchens, spiced lamb, almond-thickened stews, rice dishes scented with saffron and dried fruit. They brought those ideas back with them, where they were quickly adopted by the noble kitchens eager to show off their worldly connections. Of course, not everyone appreciated this new style of cooking. Some people balked at mixing meat with fruit. Others feared that foreign spices, especially from Islamic regions, carried with them heretical energies. There were even moral panics about cinnamon, believe it or not. Too luxurious, too sensual, too much temptation in a single bite. But the food won anyway. Flavour has a way of sneaking past ideology. And that brings us to tonight's quirky fact. There's a 13th century European cookbook called Liber de Coquina that includes recipes clearly lifted, or at least lovingly borrowed, from Arabic sources. One of them is a chicken stew with almonds, sugar and rosewater. Another calls for lamb with cumin and raisins. If you served them today in a modern restaurant, people would assume it was cutting-edge fusion cuisine. Medieval cooks, they were already doing it 800 years ago. You reach for a piece of meat wrapped in grape leaves. The leaves are soft, their edges singed from the fire. Inside, minced lamb, garlic, parsley and pine nuts. It's chewy, savoury and completely unexpected. You look across the table and see someone tearing into grilled eggplant and drizzled with a sauce so red it almost glows. Another dips bread into a chickpea mash that's got way too much garlic to be polite, but just enough to be addictive. Someone at the end of the table starts ranting about how the Crusades corrupted traditional cooking. Too many foreign flavours, he grumbles. No one respects good honest turnip stew anymore. His friend nods solemnly while eating what looks suspiciously like a North African spiced sausage. Irony is alive and well in the Middle Ages. You sip a drink that you're told is a mixture of wine, honey and herbs brought from Cyprus. It's tart and sweet, and it smells like both a garden and a bazaar. You feel it buzz in your chest and wonder how many other borrowed drinks made their way across the sea disguised as something familiar. There's no label on the bottle, just a cracked wax seal and a cork that smells like dates. Across the hall, someone begins to sing, an old Crusaders song, half ballad, half lament. The words are in a language you only half understand, but the tone is clear. Homesickness, exhaustion, a touch of regret. It matches the food, bitter and sweet, brave and broken. A monk sits down beside you and points at the bowl of spiced lentils you're working through. That one came from Jerusalem, sirs, he says. The flavour doesn't belong here. But it works, doesn't it? You nod. He raises his cup. Stolen food always tastes better. Then he winks and goes back to spooning apricot jam onto something that was definitely once an animal. You wonder if this is how fusion was born. Not out of collaboration exactly, but conquest, conflict, curiosity. People went to war but came back craving cumin. They fought over holy relics and returned with saffron. Maybe it wasn't noble, but it was undeniably delicious. There's a final plate now, roasted fowl seasoned with cinnamon and sprinkled with crushed sugar and salt. You blink at it. Is this a prank? You taste it. It's not. It's balanced, strange, a little unsettling, but it works. Sweet and salty, spiced and savoury. Every bite is like standing on a border between lands, between flavours, between centuries. You chew and think this is what history tastes like. Complex, borrowed, and absolutely unforgettable. By now, time has gone fuzzy. You've lost count of the courses, the mugs of wine, the time someone's handed you a plate with zero explanation and just enough smoke curling off it to make you hesitate before biting. But you're still here, somehow alright, somehow aware, and your tongue, though thoroughly worked over, perks up again when you catch the scent of what's coming next. Not heavy meat, not candied fruit. This time it's something earthier, simpler, something that smells like damp soil, hot bread, and the promise of breakfast. Which is weird, because it's definitely still night. Then you see it. Cheese. Big wheels of it, soft curls, tiny wedges arranged on boards that look like they were stolen from a carpenter mid-project. Some of it is hard and crumbly, pale yellow with dark edges like it aged inside a fireplace. Some is white, soft, slightly wet, cradled in fig leaves. One has blue veins running through it like a medieval map, and another smells aggressively like feet, but in a strangely inviting way. There's also fresh butter, pale gold and flecked with herbs. One bowl holds clotted cream so thick it doesn't even quiver when you prod it. You stare at this bounty, caught between awe and confusion. Cheese is a course, after all that? But apparently yes. And once you take your first bite, sharp, salty, crumbly, then slowly creamy, you understand. This isn't an afterthought. This is the reset. The soft landing, the beginning of the end. Here's your historical fact. Cheese was a staple in medieval diets, particularly in rural and monastic settings. It was protein, it was preservation, it was power food. Every village had its own type, depending on climate, livestock, and how much patience the local women had with curd and cloth. Hard cheeses aged well and travelled far. Soft cheeses were eaten fresh, smeared onto bread, mixed with herbs, or used in cooking. And monks? Monks made some of the best cheese in Europe. Hands down. You try another bite. This one's sharper, more pungent. You chew slowly, letting the flavour fill your sinuses. It hits like a whisper wrapped in smoke. Then you layer it onto a piece of coarse brown bread, thick with bran and seeds. It's rough, chewy, deeply nutty. Together, they taste like survival and pride. Next to arrive is fruit, not the overly glazed, jewelled stuff from earlier. This is simpler. Apple slices, clusters of grapes, pears sliced thin and fanned out on wooden boards. A dish of preserved cherries, sticky and dark. And beside it all, a small bowl of something golden, honey of course, thick and crystalline at the edges. You dip your bread into it, then drag it through the cheese. It sounds barbaric, but it's transcendent. A woman across the table does the same, then hums approvingly. "We call it heaven's paste," she says. You believe her, even if she just made that up on the spot. Here's your quirky fact. Some medieval households practiced cheese divination. It sounds like a joke, but it wasn't. The way cheese curdled, or failed to, was sometimes interpreted as an omen. In some regions, people wrote questions on cheesecloth and waited to see which part of the curd firmed first. Yes, really, cheese was more than food. It was fate, flavoured with rennet and aged in mystery. You move on to a softer cheese, almost spreadable, tangy, probably goat's milk. It's wrapped in herbs and tastes slightly grassy, but in a good way. Like a meadow or in early spring. A sheep strolls past your mind's eye for no apparent reason. Now there's a thick white paste made of crushed almonds and milk spooned into little cups and topped with rose petals. You hesitate. But when you taste it, it's smooth, floral, cooling. Almost like pudding, but smarter. It doesn't demand your attention. It just lingers. There's a scholarly debate about whether cheese was seen as luxurious or mundane in medieval times. The answer, as always, is it depends. Peasants ate fresh curds and cottage cheese regularly. Cheap, easy to make, high in calories. Nobles, meanwhile, imported fancy wheels from Italy or France, aged to perfection, sometimes soaked in wine or brine or even ash. You're probably eating a bit of both right now, because this hall doesn't care about that line. More platters arrive, this time with nuts and dried fruit. Walnuts, hazelnuts, slices of dried apple, golden reds, raisins, and figs so soft they collapse when you poke them. It's like nature's charcuterie board. You add a fig to your bread, lay a cheese on top, and finish with a drip of honey. It's absurd. You have no idea if medieval people actually ate it this way, but your mouth thinks they should have. Next comes a drink. A clear, sweet liquor served in tiny cups. It's infused with herbs, maybe aniseed or fennel. It's meant to help you digest. You take a sip. Your stomach whispers, "Thank you." You lean back, your fingers smeared with butter and honey. Across the hall, someone's carved a chunk of cheese into the shape of a goat and is presenting it to thunderous applause. The person next to you spreads cheese directly onto a slice of roasted pear and groans in satisfaction. A child walks by holding a chunk of blue cheese in both hands like a prize-winning turnip. The noise in the hall is gentler now, softer laughter. Fewer declarations, most of the drama has left the food. What remains is comfort, familiarity, a kind of edible lull. And maybe that's the whole point. This is what the end of a medieval feast looks like. Not a final course, but a soft unravelling. Bread and butter, cheese and fruit, wine, nuts, small sweets. Not showy, but generous. Not elaborate, but thoughtful, like someone saying, "You've made it. Rest now." You finish the last bite of fig, your fingers sticky with its syrup. A bit of cheese clings to the corner of your mouth and you don't even care. The candles have burned low, the fire reduced to slow embers. You hear a lute strumming again, aimless, barely a song, and through it all the cheese remains. The true final boss of medieval cuisine. You are now deeply, irreversibly cheese drunk. The kind of full where moving feels like a betrayal to your chair, where breathing has to be done with purpose and your limbs respond with the delay of a poorly wound clock. The fire is a gentle whisper behind you, its heat no longer intense, but consistent, like it's watching over you now, a quiet, smoky guardian. The feast, for all its spectacle, has reached its slow-breathing phase. Nothing arrives sizzling. No servers run. Even the dogs have stopped begging and are curled like furry commas in the corners. It feels like the world is winding down. Then someone brings tea, or something like it. It's served in a squat clay mug with a rim that's slightly too thick, and when you lift it to your lips, you don't smell Earl Grey or mint or lemon. Instead, it's herbs. Dry ones, crushed and steeped in hot water. There's sage, definitely, and something floral, maybe chamomile, maybe linden blossom, and a sharp edge of something like fennel or horehound. It's bitter, astringent, warming in the back of your throat, not sweet, not comforting in the way modern tea might be, but real, like it was made to bring you back to your body, and that's exactly what it starts to do. Here's your historical fact. While medieval Europeans didn't have tea in the way we think of it today, that would come later with Asian trade routes, they absolutely steeped herbs in the hot water for medicinal and spiritual purposes. Monasteries kept elaborate herbal gardens, and tisanes or infusions were common in both hospitals and homes. They were used to aid digestion, calm the nerves, or, in the case of some more suspicious blends, cleanse sin and purge unclean thoughts. You're hoping you got the digestive version. As you sip, your body begins to unclench. Your stomach, which was starting to consider staging a rebellion, settles. Your heartbeat steadies. The corners of your brain, which had been spiralling slightly into cheese-based hallucinations, ease back into orbit. Across the table, someone else is drinking the same brew. They meet your gaze and raise their mug like, "Yeah, this is the good stuff." The servers begin to return now, not with food, but with cloths and candles. They gently dab at the corners of tables, sweep crumbs into wooden bowls, refill mugs not with wine, but water. Cool, clear, quiet water. You drink some and realise you haven't tasted anything this neutral all night. It's a revelation. You feel like you're hydrating for the first time in history. Then comes a small, unexpected plate. A thin slice of something almost translucent, quince paste laid gently over a cracker-like crisp made from spelt and honey. It doesn't shout. It's not here to impress. But it has a sweetness that sneaks up on you, subtle and fresh. A palate closer, a quiet goodbye. You savour it slowly, letting each bite disappear fully before the next. Your teeth do more thinking than chewing. Next to you, a man carefully unwraps a pouch and removes a sliver of candied ginger. He pops it into his mouth and makes a face that's part bliss, part alarm. Then he passes the pouch your way. You take one. It's fiery, far more than expected, and sweet and chewy. It lights your mouth back up just enough to remember you're alive. You suck on it and sit straighter. Here's your quirky fact. Candied ginger wasn't just a treat, it was medicine. Ginger was used extensively in medieval cooking and healing, believed to warm the body, stir the appetite, and even enhance certain nocturnal activities. In large enough doses, It could cause a bit of a sweat and even induce some lightheadedness, the kind you might confuse for romantic enthusiasm or just excellent circulation. Either way, it earned a spicy reputation. The conversation in the hall has dropped to a low murmur now. Soft exchanges, half-lidded laughter, the occasional chuckle from someone recounting how they almost choked on a nut or confused a fig for a snail. It's companionable, familiar, the kind of talking that happens when no one is trying to impress anymore, because they've already shared every inch of the table together. There's a scholarly debate about how often feasts like this really happened. Some argue that the elaborate, days-long banquets were rare, reserved for coronations, weddings, or papal visits. Others suggest that among nobles, these events were more frequent than we assume, particularly during winter, when there wasn't much else to do except eat, drink, and avoid frostbite. The truth probably lies in between. Not common, but not mythical either. A real expression of status, hospitality, and the eternal human need to gather around heat and food. One of the cooks appears briefly from the kitchen, her apron smeared with sauces and soot. She carries a single bowl of something warm, what looks like a mild porridge, maybe barley steeped in almond milk. She sets it in front of an elderly guest who accepts it like a blessing. It's not glamorous, but you can smell the lavender and feel the love that went into it. That bowl isn't part of the feast, it's the aftercare. You glance back toward your mug of herbal tisane. Still warm. You sip again. The bitterness is almost gone now. Just warmth. Just steam. Your tongue no longer itches for flavour. Your brain doesn't crave the next surprise. For the first time tonight, you're not eating. You're just being. The flickering candles grow fewer. Some have burned to their waxy stubs. The fire collapses a bit inward. The shadows stretch taller along the walls. A few guests have dozed off in their seats, heads bowed like prayer statues. No one wakes them. This is the tapering, the descent, the part where the body says thank you and the mind finally gets quiet. You place your spoon down, not ceremoniously, but with finality. You've reached the other side of indulgence. The warm, silent, satisfied space where nothing needs adding. No more salt, no more honey, no more praise. The flavours have said everything they needed to say, and now they rest. At this point, you're half convinced time has stopped. Not in a dramatic, you've entered another realm kind of way, but more like your body has politely opted out of the clock. There's no past or future in this hall anymore, just the slow flicker of candlelight, the rhythmic creak of old wood, and the steady rise and fall of breath as people lean back, bellies full, eyes heavy. You're in the liminal space now, the warm, floaty, post-feast full where reality softens at the edges and the brain begins to hum like an old wine barrel, low, mellow, and pleasantly unstable. No one is eating anymore, not really. There are still crumbs on plates and bits of cheese abandoned in waxy wrappers, but the hunger is gone. What remains is ritual, familiarity, little gestures to keep the experience going just a few moments longer. Someone is slowly peeling an apple with a small knife, turning the skin into one long ribbon. Another is crumbling stale bread into their cup, watching it dissolve without drinking it. You yourself are toying with a fig stem between your fingers like it's the key to some secret door. No one rushes. No one wants it to end. And then, just as your thoughts begin to blur into sleep, a bell rings. Soft, just once, enough to lift every eyelid in the room. You look toward the far end of the hall where a man in dark robes enters. Older, hunched, with a beard so white it reflects the firelight like snow. He carries no platter, no dish, just a book, leather-bound, heavy. He sets it on the table without fanfare, and opens it with the kind of reverence normally reserved for holy relics.
Ah, it's story time.
Here's your historical fact. Readings and recitations were a common feature at the end of medieval feasts, especially in monasteries and noble courts. Sometimes they were religious, psalms, prayers, hagiographies. Other times they were secular, tales of knights. Fables, court gossip wrapped in rhyme. The idea was to feed the soul after feeding the body, to let words do what even the best meal could not, linger in the mind. The man clears his throat and begins. His voice is low and gravelly, like stones turning in a river. He speaks in a rhythmic cadence, reciting what sounds like a tale of a cook who once tricked a king into eating grass, only for the king to declare it the finest dish he'd ever had. Everyone chuckles softly. The tale isn't dramatic. It's gentle, strange, and very old. The kind of story that doesn't have a clear moral but leaves you feeling like you've learned something anyway. Next comes a poem, barely a whisper, about bread, about the life of a loaf from seed to harvest to oven to table. You've never felt such deep empathy for carbohydrates. You want to hug the nearest biscuit. Then a fable about a mouse who sneaks into a bishop's kitchen, learns to cook, and eventually becomes head chef after impersonating a nun. No one knows whether to laugh or nod solemnly. Someone mutters, "I'd eat her stew," and gets a slap on the wrist from a friend. This is the last course, the storytelling. No spoon required, it settles differently. You feel it fill the spaces food couldn't reach. Not your stomach, but your chest, the place where meaning lives. It's as ancient as any recipe, as vital as any flame. Before books were common, stories were the feast that travelled, passed from lips to ears to memory. You realise the dishes tonight weren't the only things being shared. Here's your quirky fact. Some medieval banquet hosts employed professional storytellers known as jongleurs or minstrels, whose job was to entertain the guests with riddles, legends and satire. The best ones could recite epic poems from memory, often while playing instruments or juggling. A few were so popular they had groupies, actual medieval fangirls and fanboys who followed them from castle to castle, feast to feast. The man now reads a love story, slow and bittersweet, about a baker's daughter and a travelling spice merchant who only spoke once a year, on the night the first snow fell. It ends with her gifting him a cake shaped like his homeland, which he eats alone on his ship, crying into a cup of warm milk. You don't know why, but this hits hard. You sniff, pretending it's just the herbs. There's a scholarly debate about how these stories were chosen. Some say they were planned ahead, matched to the guests and the themes of the evening. Others argue they were improvised, pulled from memory based on mood and audience. Tonight it feels like the stories chose you, like they rose from the very walls, summoned by candlelight and the scent of burnt sugar. After the last tale, a short, strange piece about a rooster who teaches a village how to boil eggs using sunlight and a magnifying glass, there's a pause, no applause, just a deep collective exhale. The reader closes the book. The hall is utterly still. You glance around. Some guests have fallen asleep where they sit, heads cradled in folded arms. A few are leaning against one another like tired siblings. Someone snores softly into a goblet. You feel your own eyes growing heavier with each breath. Your belly is warm. Your thoughts are soft. Your heartbeat hums in sync with the quiet crackle of the hearth. Someone begins to collect empty plates, not with urgency, but with ceremony, one at a time, as if each dish is a piece of the evening that must be tucked away gently. You watch a server place a crust of bread in a linen wrap and set it on a small windowsill. An offering, maybe, or just a bit of kindness for the morning birds. There's nothing left to eat. No more courses, no more surprises, just the quiet joy of having had enough. You lean back, close your eyes, and smile. The story was the final bite, and it was perfect. It's the silence afterward that feels the most satisfying. Not empty silence, but full, like a room that's just exhaled after holding its breath for hours. The kind that settles into the wood grain and warms the soles of your feet. You're still seated at the long table, which looks now like the aftermath of a storm made entirely of food, wine, and stories. Plates are stacked, cups overturned, a scattering of crumbs like breadcrumbs marking the trail through the forest of everything you've tasted tonight. And you've tasted it all. From the first buttery bite of hot bread to the candied ginger that tried to spark a small fire in your sinuses, every course has etched itself into your memory, like layers in some great culinary cathedral. And yet somehow you're not quite ready to leave. Around you the other guests are shifting slowly, stretching limbs that forgot what standing feels like. A few are curled into each other like cats in front of the hearth. A man snoozes upright, chin balanced on his fist. The lute player is still strumming softly, the same 3 notes over and over, hypnotic as heartbeat. Someone yawns so wide it becomes contagious, a wave of gentle surrender washing across the room. A server appears beside you, no longer bustling, just ambling now, and offers a basin of warm water and a linen cloth. You take it gratefully and press it to your face, to your neck, letting the heat pull the wine and sugar from your skin. It's not luxury, it's mercy. This too is part of the feast. Here's your historical fact. The final course of many medieval meals was not food, but washing. Before and after the meal, guests were offered scented water to cleanse their hands and faces, sometimes rose water, sometimes infused with herbs like thyme or sage. It was both practical and symbolic, a way to return to yourself after a shared indulgence, to leave the table refreshed, restored, and slightly more humorous than before. You wipe your hands and breathe deep. The scent is faintly herbal, comforting. You feel lighter, not physically, let's not lie to ourselves here, but in spirit, like something important has passed through you. A ceremony disguised as dinner, a kind of edible communion with history. The fire has mostly died now, only the thickest logs still burn. A low red glow that casts shadows up the stone walls like ghosts stretching one last time before bed. One of the dogs near the hearth shifts in his sleep and sighs. Even the animals are full. And now for your quirky fact, in some parts of medieval Europe, the very end of a feast was marked not with a toast, but with a round of riddles or blessings. One person might rise and recite a verse of thanks, not just to God, but to the kitchen, the animals, the weather, and the people who shared the food. In some rare cases, the lord of the manor would even offer a final dish that was completely symbolic. A wooden bowl filled with leaves or pebbles meant to represent humility and closure. Tonight there is no bowl of pebbles, but the feeling, it's there. A man stands and begins to speak. Not loud, not formal, just a few words of thanks. You catch phrases like honour of your company, the grace of the harvest, and the memory of the kitchen. There's no applause, just nods. A quiet chorus of acknowledgement. You don't need clapping when you're already full in every sense of the word. There's a scholarly debate about what exactly made medieval feasts feel sacred. Was it the religious overtones, the seasonal ties, the sheer intensity of the preparation? Or was it something less tangible, the communal rhythm of it all, the unspoken contract between guest and host that said, you will be fed and you will be changed? Whatever the reason, the result remains the same. Even now, sitting here centuries out of time, you feel it. The transformation. The subtle, delicious metamorphosis from hungry stranger to full participant in something much larger than yourself. The candles are being snuffed out one by one. A puff of smoke, a whisper of wax. Someone walks past you with a basket of linen napkins, folds them slowly with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. You smile. There's nothing rushed about any of this. Ending, it turns out, is part of the art. You rise at last, not because you want to, but because it's time. Your legs wobble, briefly confused about gravity's expectations. A server offers you a hand, steady and unhurried. You thank them, voice rough from the honey and the wine, and all the unsaid things in your chest. They nod without a word. Kindness, it seems, needs no language. You walk slowly towards the hall's wide wooden door, past tables littered with the remnants of joy. There's a basin at the exit, and you pause, cupping cool water in your hands, letting it run down your wrists. It doesn't wash the night away, it seals it. Just before you step outside, you glance back one last time. The hall is dim now, shadows long, the fire little more than a warm scar in the hearth. A few guests linger, hushed in conversation. Someone is tucking a blanket around a dozing friend. The cook appears briefly, his apron stained, his face soot-smudged, and smiles at no one in particular. He knows what he's done. This wasn't just a meal, it was a memory. You step into the night. The air is cool, crisp. The sky overhead is heavy with stars, the kind you only see in places where the world hasn't been paved and lit and drowned in neon. You breathe it in, the smoke, the spice still clinging to your coat, the distant scent of roasted meat woven into your very soul. And there it is, the final, quiet truth. The best food in history didn't come from labs or factories or celebrity chefs. It came from fire, patience, and people who understood that cooking wasn't just about feeding the body. It was about feeding the story, and tonight you've become part of it. You're walking now, carefully, like someone who's been carved out of warmth and layered in bread. The path beneath your feet crunches softly, gravel or frost, or just the dust of the evening settling under you. There's a glow behind you still, the hall flickering with its final embers, but out here it's all cool air and stars. The kind of stars that don't wink but watch. No wind, no rush, just you and the deep, satisfied hush of a night well fed. You feel different, not dramatically, but inside, somewhere under your ribs, there's a weight that isn't just food, It's memory, experience, a quiet fullness that doesn't demand anything, just exists, like a candle that's been burning all night and finally gets to rest. Every part of your body is still humming with the ghosts of the feast. Your fingers smell faintly of garlic and honey. Your clothes carry traces of smoke, toasted flour, maybe cinnamon. Your breath, let's be honest, could still melt paint. But there's no shame in it. These are the marks of survival, of participation. You made it through a medieval banquet, a true one, and lived to tell the tale. As you climb into bed, the blankets feel heavier than usual, like gravity itself has increased slightly, pulling you closer to the earth, to sleep, to dreams. Your limbs ache in the nicest possible way. Your stomach is too tired to complain. Even your thoughts are quiet, slipping slowly into that space between waking and dreaming where everything softens. And as you drift off, you think back just for a moment to the first bite. That warm, crusty bread, the way it cracked between your teeth. The butter, the salt, the beginning of everything. You didn't just eat food tonight. You travelled through it. Through centuries. Through spice routes and manor houses and fireside kitchens where someone, nameless now, decided to add a little fennel to the stew and changed history. And as the dark pulls you in, one slow breath at a time, you think, maybe the best food in history wasn't just about flavour.
Maybe it was about care.
Maybe it was about feeding people so well they could fall asleep and know they were loved.